My son sent me a text message on the eve of his wedding that read, "Dad, please do not come to the ceremony tomorrow. Paige thinks your presence will ruin the aesthetic of the party. Her family is very traditional and frankly, you do not fit the image we are trying to project. I will send you photos later, sorry." I read the message twice. I did not cry. I did not call him back to beg. I simply walked over to my laptop and logged into the mainframe of Blackwood Holdings. I saw a pending charge of $50,000 for imported white roses. I clicked one button, decline. Then I clicked another, freeze all assets. The next morning, they were not worrying about the aesthetic of their wedding photos. They were worrying about why security was escorting them out of their presidential suite. Before I tell you how I destroyed my son's fake empire in less than 24 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by your own flesh and blood. My name is Cyrus Blackwood, and at 67 years old, I have learned that silence is the loudest noise you can make. I stood in the middle of my living room in a townhouse that most people would call modest. The air smelled of starch and old lavender. On the ironing board lay my navy blue suit. It was 10 years old, but the wool was good, and I had polished the brass buttons until they shone like gold coins. I was ready. I was proud. Tomorrow was the day my only son Trey was marrying into the Huntington family. On the table next to the iron sat a leather-bound Bible that had belonged to my grandfather. Inside the pages of the Book of Proverbs, I had placed a cashier's check. It was a wedding gift, $500,000, $500,000 to help them buy their first home so they would not have to rent like I did for so many years. I had worked 3 jobs simultaneously in my 30s, hauling crates at the docks, driving trucks across state lines, and cleaning floors to ensure Trey never felt the cold wind of poverty. I had built Blackwood Logistics from one rusted van into a global fleet, but I never flashed the money. I wanted Trey to build character. Then my phone buzzed on the ironing board. It was Trey. I picked it up, expecting a last-minute request to bring the ring or perhaps just a nervous groom needing reassurance. Instead, I saw the text that severed the last cord connecting us. "Dad, do not come to the wedding. Paige thinks your presence will ruin the aesthetic. Her family is very traditional. You just do not fit the image." I stared at the words. Ruin the aesthetic. My hands, which are calloused and scarred from 40 years of labor, were apparently too rough for the delicate sensibilities of the Huntington family. They saw an old black man in a dated suit and saw a blemish. They did not see the father who paid for the private schools where Trey learned to be ashamed of me. They did not see the man who paid for the engagement ring Trey claimed he bought with his savings. I looked at the suit on the ironing board. I looked at the Bible with the $500,000 check inside. I did not reply to the text. There was nothing to say. I picked up the Bible and removed the check. I walked to the kitchen sink and struck a match. I watched the blue and yellow paper curl and turn to black ash, washing it down the drain with a splash of tap water. Then I walked to my home office. It is a small room with no windows, but it houses the secure server for my private equity firm. I sat down and typed in my credentials. The screen glowed blue, reflecting in my glasses. I navigated to the sub-accounts managed under the Blackwood Family Trust. I pulled up Trey's profile. I had given him a platinum card under the guise of a small startup loan to help him launch his consulting business. I told him he had a limit and he needed to be careful. In reality, it was an unlimited line of credit backed by my personal assets. I looked at the recent activity. It was a hemorrhage of vanity. $50,000 for floral arrangements charged 10 minutes ago, $12,000 for a vintage champagne tower, $8,000 for custom silk napkins embroidered with the Huntington crest. They were burning through money that wasn't theirs to celebrate a union that excluded the man providing the fuel. I looked at the status bar. Active. I moved my mouse to the administrative override. I selected the option marked Red Flag Protocol. This is a setting usually reserved for when a card is stolen or when a client is under federal investigation. It instantly freezes all associated accounts, revokes all authorized user privileges, and alerts credit bureaus of potential fraud. I clicked execute. The screen flashed red. Account suspended. I wasn't done. I pulled up the health insurance policy I had been paying for Trey since he turned 26. Canceled. I pulled up the access codes for the trust fund set to activate on his 35th birthday. Revoked. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. It rang once. Silas speaking. Silas is my attorney and the only person who knows exactly how much I am worth. Silas, it is Cyrus. I need you to execute a kill switch on the penthouse lease. There was a pause on the other end. Silas never asked unnecessary questions, but even he was surprised by the timing. The wedding is tomorrow, Cyrus. Are you sure? I am not going to the wedding, Silas. I have been informed that I do not fit the aesthetic. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. Understood, sir. Understood. I will contact the building management immediately. Do you want me to give them a grace period? No grace period. Treat it as a hostile squatting situation. Change the locks remotely. Done. Anything else? Yes. Contact the valet service at the resort. The Porsche Trey is driving is registered to the company fleet. Report it as unauthorized use. Have them tow it. Consider it done. Good night, Cyrus. I hung up. I went back to the living room and unplugged the iron. I folded the navy blue suit and put it back in the closet. Then I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of black coffee, and sat in the dark listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the calm of a man who had finally put down a heavy load he had been carrying for too long. 3 hours later, and 200 miles away, the chaos began. The setting was the Grand Coastal Resort, a 5-star venue overlooking the ocean, where the air smelled of salt and expensive perfume. Trey and Paige were standing at the front desk surrounded by their bridal party. Paige looked stunning in a white dress that likely cost more than my car, holding a clutch bag that could feed a family for a year. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Huntington, were standing nearby, looking bored and sipping complimentary sparkling water. The lobby was bustling with guests arriving for the rehearsal dinner. The atmosphere was one of effortless wealth, the kind of environment where money is never discussed because its presence is assumed. Trey placed the platinum card on the marble counter with the casual arrogance of someone who has never had a payment declined. We are checking in. Presidential suite for us and the deluxe ocean view rooms for the parents. The receptionist, a young woman with a polite smile, took the card and swiped it. She frowned slightly. She swiped it again. Then she typed something into her keyboard. I am sorry, sir, the card has been declined. Trey laughed. It was a nervous sound. That is impossible. Run it again. It is a platinum card. There is no limit. I have run it 3 times, sir. It is returning a code I have never seen before. It says contact issuer immediately. Security alert. Paige stepped forward, her smile tight. Trey, stop playing around. Use the other card. The guests are waiting for their room keys. Trey pulled out his backup card. A gold card also linked to my accounts. He handed it over. The receptionist swiped it. Declined. The silence that followed was heavy. The guests behind them began to shuffle their feet. Mr. Huntington cleared his throat loudly. Is there a problem here, Trey? I thought you said everything was taken care of. It is taken care of. Trey was sweating now. His forehead was glistening under the lobby lights. It must be a bank error. Their system is probably down. Let me call them. He pulled out his phone and dialed the priority support number on the back of the card. He put it on speaker so Paige could hear that it was just a technical glitch. Welcome to Blackwood Financial Services. The automated voice was cheerful. We are unable to complete your call. The account number you are calling from has been flagged for suspicious activity and is currently locked. Goodbye. The line went dead. Paige turned to Trey, her eyes narrowing. What does that mean? What do you mean, locked? I do not know, babe. I swear. It is my dad's account. He must have messed something up. Let me call him. Trey dialed my number. I sat in my kitchen and watched my phone light up. Trey calling. I took a sip of my coffee. I let it ring. At the resort, Trey redialed and redialed. He is not picking up. The hotel manager stepped out from the back office. He was a tall man with a suit that cost more than Trey's entire wardrobe. He did not look amused. Mr. Blackwood, we have a significant outstanding balance for the floral delivery that just arrived. $50,000. The vendor is refusing to unload the truck until payment is confirmed. And since your payment method for the rooms has failed, we cannot issue any room keys. Paige's mother stepped in. Her voice was high and sharp. This is ridiculous. Do you know who we are? We are the Huntingtons. The manager looked at her with a flat expression. That is wonderful, madam, but unless the Huntingtons wish to provide a valid form of payment covering the $62,000 currently due for the rooms and the vendors, I will have to ask you to vacate the lobby. You are blocking the check-in line for paying guests. $62,000. Trey looked at Paige. Paige looked at her parents. Dad, can you... Trey started. Mr. Huntington took a step back. Me. You told us this wedding was your gift to Paige. You told us your trust fund covered everything. Are you telling me you do not have the money? I do. I mean, my dad does. It is just a glitch. Paige grabbed Trey's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Fix this, Trey. Fix this right now. My friends are watching. This is humiliating. I cannot fix it if he does not answer the phone. Then pay with your own money. Transfer it from your savings. Trey looked at the floor. He did not have savings. He had an image I had paid for. The manager signaled to 2 security guards standing near the elevators. Gentlemen, if payment is not rendered in 2 minutes, I will have to ask you to escort this party off the premises. Trey tried one last time. He sent a text. Dad, pick up. Emergency. The card isn't working. We are at the hotel. Everyone is watching. Please. I saw the text come in. I deleted it. Back at the resort, the humiliation was absolute. The manager nodded to the security guards. Please remove their luggage from the bell cart. Wait, Paige screamed. You cannot do this. We are getting married tomorrow. Not here, you are not. Not unless you pay. One of the security guards reached for the handle of Paige's Louis Vuitton suitcase. She slapped his hand away. Do not touch my things. Ma'am, if you cause a scene, we will call the police. Mr. Huntington pulled out his wallet. His hands were shaking. He pulled out a credit card. Here, put the rooms on this. We will sort out the rest later. The receptionist took the card. She swiped it. She looked up, her face apologetic. I am sorry, Mr. Huntington. Declined. Insufficient funds. The lobby went deadly silent. Paige stared at her father. Mr. Huntington turned bright red. That is impossible. It seems the manager said, his voice dripping with ice, that nobody in this party has the means to be here. Security, escort them out. Now. 5 minutes later, the entire wedding party was standing on the curb outside the resort, surrounded by their expensive luggage. The ocean breeze blew Paige's hair across her face, but she didn't move to fix it. She was staring at Trey with a look of pure hatred. This is your father's fault, she hissed. That old man is incompetent. He probably forgot to pay the bill. Trey was frantically tapping on his phone, trying to access his mobile banking app. Access denied. User suspended. Contact administrator. He looked up at the towering hotel. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over them. They were stranded. No rooms, no venue, no flowers. We have to go to his house, Trey said. We have to go see him. He has to fix this. They hailed a large van taxi, piling the luggage in. The drive back to the city was 2 hours. 2 hours of silence. 2 hours of Paige text messaging her friends, telling them there was a technical issue with the venue. 2 hours of Trey sweating through his shirt. They arrived at my townhouse at 6 in the morning. I was awake. I had been awake all night. I was sitting on the front porch in my rocking chair, wearing my bathrobe, holding a mug of coffee. I watched the taxi pull up. I watched Trey fumble with the cash to pay the driver because his cards were useless. Paige stormed up the walkway first, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She screamed, "What is wrong with you? You ruined everything. Open the accounts. Right now." I took a slow sip of coffee. I looked at her. I looked at Trey, who was dragging suitcases up the path, looking like a beaten dog. "Good morning," I said. "Open the damn accounts," Dad Trey yelled. "The hotel kicked us out." Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I looked at him. I looked at the son who had told me I ruined his aesthetic. I imagine I said, my voice calm and steady, that it was almost as embarrassing as having a father who is a janitor. "Isn't that what you told your college friends I did?" Trey froze. "That is different. Look, we don't have time for a lecture. We need the money. The wedding is in 6 hours. "There will be no money, Trey." "What?" I stood up. I am 6'2". I may be 67, but I can still lift a 200-pound crate. I towered over them. "You uninvited me to the wedding. You said I did not fit the image. You were right. I do not fit the image of a walking ATM for ungrateful children. I closed the accounts. All of them." Paige stepped forward, getting in my face. "You can't do that. That is our money." "No," I corrected her. "That is my money. The money I earned while you were busy pretending to be rich. You have nothing." Trey laughed, a dry disbelief sound. "You are bluffing. You wouldn't do this. You love me. I did love you. I loved you enough to give you everything, and you loved me enough to be ashamed of me. So now you can be proud. You are a self-made man, Trey. Start making yourself." I turned to go back inside. Fix this or I will never let you see your future grandchildren, Paige threatened. I stopped. I looked back at her. My dear, if you raise them to be anything like you, I think I will pass. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. Outside I heard Paige scream. Then I heard a siren. A tow truck was pulling up to the curb. It was backing up towards the Porsche Panamera Trey had parked on the street the night before the one he claimed he leased with his company profits. The driver hopped out and hooked the chains to the bumper. Hey, what are you doing? Trey ran down the steps. That is my car. The driver checked his clipboard. Vehicle reported stolen by Blackwood Holdings. Unauthorized possession. Stolen. My dad owns Blackwood Holdings, then you better take it up with him, kid. I just have an order to repo. Trey watched as the car was lifted into the air. His ride to his own wedding was being towed away. Paige was sitting on her suitcase on the sidewalk crying not because she was sad, but because she was furious. I watched through the blinds. This was just the beginning. They thought the worst thing that could happen was a declined credit card. They had no idea that I had already engaged the next phase of the plan. The Huntingtons were about to find out that their construction company, which they had leveraged to the hilt, was currently being acquired by a shell company I controlled, and I had no intention of keeping the current management. The wedding was supposed to be at noon. It was currently 7 a.m., and the storm was just making landfall. The pounding on my front door started at 7 in the morning. It was not a polite knock. It was the desperate, rhythmic thud of a fist hitting wood with entitlement. I was sitting in my favorite armchair by the window nursing a second cup of black coffee. The steam rose from the mug, curling in the morning light. I did not get up immediately. I took a slow, deliberate sip and let the banging continue for another minute. I wanted them to wait. I wanted them to realize that my time was no longer theirs to demand. Finally, I stood up and walked to the door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. Trey stood there looking like he hadn't slept in 24 hours. His designer shirt was wrinkled, and there were sweat stains under his arms. Next to him was Paige. She was vibrating with rage. She pushed past Trey and stormed into my living room without waiting to be invited. Her eyes darted around the space, scanning the worn velvet sofa, the shelves lined with old paperbacks, and the slightly faded rug that I had bought 10 years ago. Her nose wrinkled as if she had just stepped into a landfill. "It smells like old people in here," she announced, her voice shrill and cutting. "God, Trey, how can you stand it? It smells like mothballs and cheap detergent." She turned to me, her face twisted into a scowl that ruined her perfect makeup. "Fix it, Cyrus. Fix it right now." I closed the door, gently shutting out the morning breeze. I walked past them and sat back down in my armchair. I did not offer them coffee. I did not offer them a seat. "Good morning to you too, Paige," I said, my voice flat. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this invasion?" "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "You embarrassed us. You humiliated us in front of the hotel staff, in front of my parents. Do you have any idea how much pull the Huntingtons have in this town? You made us look like beggars." I looked at her calmly. "You are beggars, Paige. You were trying to pay for a $60,000 weekend with a card that isn't yours. That is the definition of begging." Trey stepped forward, running a hand through his messy hair. "Dad, please, stop this. We need the card reactivated. The wedding is in 5 hours. We have guests arriving at the venue. The vendors are threatening to walk. Just turn the money back on." I looked at my son. He was 32 years old, but standing there in my living room, he looked like a toddler throwing a tantrum in a toy store. "Why should I, Trey?" "Because I am your son," he pleaded. I took another sip of coffee. "Yesterday I was your son's father. Yesterday I was the man who raised you. But then I received a text message. A text message that said I was not welcome. A text message that said I did not fit the image." Trey flinched. He looked at his shoes. Paige, however, did not back down. She crossed her arms over her chest. "We were just being honest, Cyrus. Look at you. Look at this place. You live like a hermit. You wear suits from the last century. My family is elite. We have standards. We have an aesthetic to maintain. We couldn't have you wandering around looking like the hired help in the wedding photos. It would confuse people." I set my mug down on the side table. The ceramic made a sharp click against the wood. "So let me understand this correctly. I am good enough to pay for the aesthetic, but I am not good enough to be seen in it." Trey looked up, his eyes pleading. "Dad, it isn't like that. It is just—" He paused, struggling to find the words that wouldn't sound cruel, but the truth is rarely kind. "Dad, look at your hands." I looked down at my hands. They were resting on my knees. They are large hands. The skin is dark and rough like terrified leather. There is a thick scar running across my left thumb from a box cutter accident in 1995. There are calluses on my palms that never went away even after I stopped driving the trucks myself. They are the hands of a man who has worked every single day of his life. What about them, Trey? They are rough, Dad. They are working-class hands. Paige's father has never lifted anything heavier than a golf club. His hands are smooth. When you shake hands with people, you have a grip that hurts. You have grease under your nails sometimes, even when you scrub them. It makes people uncomfortable. It signals that you come from a different world. We just didn't want any awkward questions about why the groom's father looks like a laborer. The room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I looked at my hands again. I remembered how these hands had carried Trey when he had a fever of 104, because I couldn't afford a car to get to the hospital, so I ran 3 miles with him in my arms. I remembered how these hands had stacked crates in a freezing warehouse for 16 hours a day so that Trey could have the newest sneakers. I remembered how these hands had signed the tuition checks for the private school where he learned to despise the very labor that fed him. I see, I said softly. My hands are the problem. Yes, Paige interjected. It is a visual thing, Cyrus. You wouldn't understand. You don't have taste. But we are willing to overlook your little tantrum if you just open the accounts now. We can still salvage the reception. I stood up slowly. The chair creaked. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. Parked right in front of my driveway was the white Porsche Panamera. It was gleaming in the sun, a symbol of wealth that Trey had paraded around town for the last 6 months. He told everyone he leased it with his bonus check. In reality, I bought it through one of my shell companies and let him use it because I wanted him to be safe. I turned back to them. You are right, Trey. My hands are rough. They are the hands of a brawler, a builder. And you are right, Paige. I do not have taste. I prefer function over form. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. So I am going to make a functional decision. Since I am not part of the wedding, I am no longer part of the financing. And since my hands are too dirty to shake the hands of your guests, they are also too dirty to sign the checks that pay for your lifestyle. What are you doing? Trey asked, his voice rising in panic. I tapped the screen. I was calling the asset recovery team I had put on standby. I am cleaning up the aesthetic, I said. Outside, a loud beep cut through the morning air. It was followed by the heavy mechanical whine of a hydraulic lift. Trey spun around and ran to the window. No. He scrambled to the door, tearing it open. Paige followed him, her heels clacking on the hardwood. I walked slowly behind them, stepping out onto the porch. A massive flatbed tow truck had backed up to the Porsche. A large man in a neon vest was already hooking the chains to the front axle. The truck had the logo of Metro Recovery Services on the side, a subsidiary of a company I acquired 3 years ago. Hey, stop that, Trey screamed, running down the driveway. Get away from my car. That is my car. The driver didn't even look up. He yanked the chain tight and signaled to the operator in the cab. The winch groaned, and the front of the white Porsche lifted into the air. Sir, step back, the driver said, his voice bored. You can't take this, Trey yelled, grabbing the driver's arm. I have the lease. It is in my name. The driver shook him off effortlessly. No, it isn't, kid. This vehicle is registered to Blackwood Fleet Services. The owner reported it as unauthorized use due to suspected fraud. I have a repossession order right here. Fraud, Paige shrieked. She was standing on the lawn, her hands in her hair. We didn't commit fraud. That old man is lying. She pointed a manicured finger at me standing on the porch. Tell him, Cyrus. Tell him it is a mistake. I looked down at them from the high ground of my front steps. My rough, working-class hands were clasped behind my back. It is not a mistake, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the sound of the truck engine. The user agreement for that vehicle was contingent on the driver being a person of character. Since it has come to my attention that the driver is ashamed of the source of the vehicle, the contract is void. The car was fully on the flatbed now. The driver secured the wheels with straps. You are ruining everything, Paige screamed, running towards the truck as if she could physically hold it back. Do you know how much that car costs? We need it for the exit photos. We need it to drive to the venue. The driver ignored her. He climbed into the cab and revved the engine. Trey stood in the middle of the street looking defeated. He looked at the empty spot where his status symbol used to be. Then he looked at me. How are we supposed to get to the wedding, Dad? I shrugged. You have legs, Trey. Use them. Or maybe you can call Mr. Huntington. Surely a man of his elite status has a spare limousine lying around. The tow truck pulled away carrying the Porsche down the street and around the corner. The silence that followed was broken only by Paige's sobbing. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because she was powerless, and for a woman like Paige that was a fate worse than death. She turned to Trey and started hitting his chest with her fists. "Do something, you idiot! Do something! Call the police! Call a lawyer!" Trey caught her wrists. "Stop it, Paige. Stop." He looked up at me again. His eyes were red. "I hate you," he shouted. "I hate you for this." I nodded slowly. "That is fine, son. You hated me yesterday too. You just didn't say it to my face because you needed my money. At least now we are being honest." I turned and walked back into my house. I closed the door and locked it. I went back to my chair and picked up my coffee. It was still warm. I could hear them arguing outside. Paige was screaming about calling an Uber, but neither of them had a working credit card. They would have to walk 3 blocks to the bus stop. I took a sip of coffee. The invasion had been repelled. But the war was far from over. I checked my watch. It was 8:30 in the morning. Mr. and Mrs. Huntington would be waking up soon at the hotel expecting a champagne breakfast. Instead, they were about to receive a phone call from their bank that would ruin their appetite for the rest of their lives. I opened my laptop again. It was time to deal with the in-laws. An hour after the tow truck disappeared around the corner, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb. It was a hired car service, the kind with a magnetic logo slapped on the door, not a private driver. I noticed the tires were worn and the bumper had a scratch on the left side. For a family that claimed to be the pillars of high society, the Huntingtons certainly had a flexible definition of luxury. I was sweeping the porch. It was a simple task, a meditative rhythm that kept my hands busy while my mind calculated the destruction of my enemies. The dust settled on the concrete steps as the heavy door of the Lincoln swung open. A man stepped out. He was tall, with silver hair that was sprayed into helmet-like submission. He wore a linen suit that was trying too hard to look casual, but the fabric was pulling at the buttons. This was Arthur Huntington. He looked at my neighborhood with a sneer that suggested he feared catching a disease just by breathing the air. Next to him stepped a woman who looked like she had been preserved in amber and expensive Chardonnay. Mrs. Huntington wore large sunglasses and a scarf that cost more than my monthly utility bill. Trey and Paige were sitting on the curb, their suitcases surrounding them like the wreckage of a plane crash. When they saw the car, Paige jumped up, wiping her eyes, and ran to her mother. "Oh, thank God you are here," Paige wailed, burying her face in her mother's silk scarf. He ruined everything. He took the car. He cut the cards. Arthur Huntington did not look at his daughter. He looked at me. He walked up the driveway, his loafers crunching on the gravel. He stopped 3 steps below me, looking up. He did not extend a hand. He did not introduce himself. He just pointed a manicured finger at my chest. "You there?" he barked. I stopped sweeping. I leaned on the broom handle and looked down at him. "Yes," I said. "Are you the father?" Arthur asked. The tone was not a question. It was an accusation. It was the tone a man uses when he is speaking to staff he intends to fire. "I am Cyrus Blackwood," I replied. Arthur snorted. He looked at my work boots, then at the broom in my hand. "Well, Cyrus, you have made quite a mess of things, haven't you? My daughter called me in hysterics. Something about a declined card and a missing car. I assume this is some sort of clerical error on your part, but let me be clear. We do not have time for incompetence. The wedding is tomorrow." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather money clip. He peeled off a $100 bill and held it out to me. "Here, take this. Go clean yourself up. Maybe buy a shirt that doesn't look like it came from a donation bin, and then fix the accounts. I want my daughter in that bridal suite by noon. Do you understand me?" I looked at the $100 bill fluttering in the wind. I looked at his face. He truly believed he was doing me a favor. He truly believed that $100 was a life-changing amount of money for me. He looked at me and saw a gardener. He saw a laborer. He saw someone who existed solely to serve his needs. I did not take the money. "You can put that away, Arthur," I said, my voice low and even. "You are going to need every cent of it for the Uber ride home." Arthur turned a shade of purple that clashed with his linen suit. "Excuse me," he sputtered. "Do you know who I am? I am Arthur Huntington. I own Huntington Construction. I build skyscrapers. You sweep porches. Do not speak to me like that. I smiled. It was a cold smile. I know exactly who you are, Arthur. And I know that skyscrapers are not the only things you build. You also build mountains of debt. Arthur froze. His eyes darted to Trey, who was standing by the car, head down, looking at his shoes. Trey, get in the car, Arthur commanded. We are leaving. We will figure this out without this peasant. Trey looked at me. For a second I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. But then he looked at Paige, who was glaring at him, and his spine dissolved. He picked up the suitcases and started loading them into the trunk of the Lincoln. Mrs. Huntington, however, did not get in the car immediately. She walked up the driveway. She stopped closer to me than her husband had dared. She lowered her sunglasses and looked me in the eye. Her eyes were blue and cold like glacial ice. She smelled of gin and desperation. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice a hushed whisper so that Trey and Paige could not hear. Let us be realistic for a moment, shall we? I waited. We accepted Trey into our family, she continued, because we were under the impression that he came with certain financial guarantees. A trust fund, a portfolio. Security, she looked at my house again, her lip curling. We certainly did not accept him for his pedigree. Let us be honest. A boy like Trey does not marry a Huntington without bringing something substantial to the table. We overlooked his background. We overlooked his family. We overlooked you. We did this because we thought he could provide the lifestyle Paige deserves. She paused, letting the weight of her prejudice hang in the air between us. She didn't use the racial slur, but it was there hidden in the words background and family. It was woven into the way she looked at my skin and then at her own. If you do not turn the money back on Mr. Blackwood, she hissed, if you do not pay for this wedding and reinstate his access to the trust, the marriage is off. We will take Paige and we will leave. Do you want your son to be heartbroken? Do you want him to be humiliated? Do you want him to be dumped because his father was too cheap to secure his future? I looked at this woman. I saw the layers of makeup covering the wrinkles of worry. I saw the jewelry that was likely insured for more than its value. She was trying to sell me her daughter. She was negotiating a business transaction, not a marriage. And she was using my son's race and my perceived poverty as leverage. You are asking me to buy your daughter, I said quietly. I am asking you to pay the admission fee, she corrected, smooth as silk. If you want your bloodline mixed with ours, you have to pay the premium. Fix it, Cyrus, or Trey comes home with us as a chauffeur, not a husband. She turned on her heel and walked back to the car. She climbed into the back seat next to Paige. Arthur got in the front. Trey squeezed in the back. The car was overloaded. The suspension groaned as it pulled away from the curb, leaving a cloud of exhaust in my face. I stood there for a long time, gripping the broom handle until my knuckles turned white. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought that by threatening to reject Trey, they could force my hand. They thought I was a desperate old man who needed their validation. They were wrong. I put the broom down. I walked into my house and went straight to my office. The air was cool and dark. I sat down at my desk and unlocked my secure phone. I dialed Silas. It was a Saturday, but Silas answered on the second ring. Status report, Cyrus. Silas, I need you to pull the file on Huntington Construction, the loan application they submitted last week. One moment, I heard the clicking of keys. Here it is. They applied for a bridge loan, $5 million. They are in a liquidity crisis, Cyrus. Their vendors have put a hold on materials. They have 3 projects stalled. They are bleeding cash. They need this loan to make payroll on Monday. If they do not get it, they are insolvent. I leaned back in my chair. I knew it. They were broke. That was why they were so desperate for the wedding to happen. They needed Trey's trust fund to plug the holes in their sinking ship. They weren't just marrying off their daughter, they were looking for a bailout. And they had the audacity to sneer at me while they begged for my money. Who is the lender on the application, Silas? It is a private equity firm out of Delaware, Vantage Capital. I allowed myself a small, dry smile. Vantage Capital was one of my holding companies. I owned it. I was the bank. Silas, I want you to approve the loan. Silence on the other line. Approve it, Cyrus. They are a terrible risk. Their credit is shot. I know. Approve it anyway. But I want you to add a rider to the contract. A specific clause. I want full personal collateral. You mean a personal guarantee? No, Silas, I mean everything. I want a lien on their primary residence. their vacation home in the Hamptons, their cars, their art collection, and a controlling interest in the company stock if they default on a single payment. That is aggressive, Cyrus. That is predatory. They are predators, Silas. I am just feeding them. They are desperate. They will sign anything to keep the lights on and the champagne flowing for one more week. Send the paperwork to Arthur Huntington's email immediately. Mark it urgent. Tell him the funds can be released within the hour if he signs digitally right now. Understood. Sending it now. I hung up the phone. I stared at the black screen. Mrs. Huntington had talked about admission fees. She had talked about paying premiums. She wanted to play the game of high finance and elite maneuvering. She had no idea she was playing against the house. By signing that loan, Arthur Huntington was handing me the keys to his entire life. He was going to use that money to pay for the wedding, to pay for the hotel, to prove that he was still a big shot. He was going to dig a hole so deep he would never climb out. And when the first payment came due in 30 days, I would be there. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured the cold coffee down the sink and brewed a fresh pot. My son was gone. He had chosen his side. He was sitting in a crowded car with people who despised him, people who saw him as a ticket to survival, not a human being. He was willing to let them insult me, to let them demean his own heritage just to stay in their orbit. It broke my heart, but it also clarified my vision. The wedding was going to happen. I would make sure of it. Not because I supported it, but because it was the perfect stage for the final act. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to see them celebrating on my dime one last time before I pulled the rug out from under them. I went to my closet. I pushed aside the navy blue suit. In the back, covered in plastic, was a tuxedo I hadn't worn in years. I unzipped the bag. It was black, sleek, and timeless. I wasn't going to the wedding as a guest. I wasn't going as the father of the groom. I was going as the owner. But first there was one more loose end to tie up. Trey and Paige were heading to the penthouse. They thought it was their safe haven. They thought they could hide there, regroup, and plan their next attack. They were wrong. I picked up my phone again. I opened the building management app for the skyscraper downtown. Unit 40B, the penthouse. Status occupied. I tapped the screen. Status lockout mode engaged. I watched the icon turn from green to red. Enjoy the view from the hallway, son, I whispered. The Huntingtons had called me a gardener. Tomorrow I would show them exactly what I was planning to prune. Trey and Paige arrived at the Sterling Tower penthouse just after noon. The Uber ride from my house had cost them nearly $80, which Trey had paid with a crumpled bill he found in his jacket pocket, his last reserve of cash. They stood in the sleek marble lobby, surrounded by their mountain of luggage, looking like refugees from a high-fashion war zone. The concierge, usually a man named David, who greeted Trey by name, was conspicuously absent. Instead, a stern-faced security guard watched them from behind the desk, his eyes tracking their every move. Trey punched the elevator button with aggressive force. "We just need to shower," Paige muttered, her voice tight with stress. "We need to regroup. We can call the bank from the apartment. Maybe we can get a courier to bring cash from your trust fund manager." Trey didn't answer. He was staring at the floor numbers lighting up. He looked sick. The elevator doors slid open on the 40th floor. The hallway smelled of expensive ozone and silence. They dragged their suitcases down the plush carpet towards Unit 40B, the double mahogany doors that had been their sanctuary, their symbol of arrival. Trey reached for the biometric scanner next to the door handle. He pressed his thumb against the glass plate, expecting the familiar green light and the soft click of the lock disengaging. Instead, the scanner flashed a harsh, angry red. Access denied. Trey frowned. He wiped his thumb on his pants and pressed it again. Harder this time. Access denied. User permissions revoked. "What is wrong now?" Paige snapped, dropping her makeup case with a thud. "Open the door, Trey. I need to get out of these clothes." "I am trying," Trey said, panic creeping into his voice. "It is not reading my print. It must be a system error. Everything is going wrong today." He tried his index finger. Then he tried punching in the backup code on the keypad. Error. Code invalid. He rattled the handle. It was locked tight. Paige pushed him aside. "Move. Let me try." She pressed her thumb to the scanner. She had been added to the lease 3 months ago when she moved in. Access denied. She stared at the little screen, her mouth opening in disbelief. "Did you forget to pay the rent too?" she hissed. "Is that it? Did you spend all our money on... What exactly, Trey? You don't do anything." I didn't forget, Trey stammered. The rent is auto-pay. It comes out of the... He stopped. It came out of the account I had frozen. Before he could finish the sentence, the elevator chimed behind them. They spun around. The doors opened and 3 men stepped out. 2 were large security guards in tactical vests. The third was Mr. Henderson, the building manager, a man who usually treated Trey with the deferential politeness reserved for valuable tenants. Today, however, he looked like an executioner. He held a clipboard in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Huntington," Mr. Henderson said, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "I see you have discovered the lock change." "What is going on?" Henderson Trey demanded, trying to muster some authority. "Why are we locked out of our apartment?" "We live here. Open this door immediately." "I am afraid I cannot do that, sir," Mr. Henderson replied calmly. He tapped his tablet screen. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, the lease on Unit 40B has been terminated by the owner. The unit has been reclaimed for immediate commercial use." "Terminated," Paige shrieked. "You can't just terminate a lease. We have tenant rights. We have a contract." Mr. Henderson looked at his clipboard. "Actually, Ms. Huntington, you were never on the lease. You were listed as a guest, and Mr. Blackwood here was residing under a corporate housing agreement. That agreement contained a clause allowing the owner to reclaim the property at any time without notice for business necessity. That clause was exercised this morning." Trey stared at him. Corporate housing. He had always told Paige he rented it directly. He had told her he negotiated a killer deal. He didn't know the details because he never read the paperwork. "I handled the paperwork." "Who is the owner?" Trey asked, his voice trembling. "Who is doing this to us?" Mr. Henderson looked at him with a strange expression, a mix of pity and confusion. "The owner is Blackwood Holdings, sir, the parent company." Paige froze. She turned slowly to look at Trey. "Blackwood Holdings. Blackwood, that is your last name, Trey." Trey looked like he was about to vomit. I don't know what that means. It is just a coincidence. Blackwood is a common name." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "It is not a coincidence, sir. The deed lists the primary shareholder of Blackwood Holdings as Cyrus Blackwood, your father." The silence that followed was absolute. Paige looked at Trey, then at the door, then back at Trey. Her eyes were wide, processing the information. "Your father owns this building," Mr. Henderson corrected her. "He owns the holding company that owns the building, Ms. Huntington, and several others in the city, I believe. He sent the order himself. He stated that the unit is being converted into a file storage facility effective immediately." "File storage," Paige whispered. "He is kicking us out to store paper, Mr." Henderson nodded to the security guards. "We have been instructed to allow you 30 minutes to retrieve your personal effects. Anything left after that time will be moved to off-site storage at your expense. The guards will supervise. You may enter now." He swiped his master key card. The light turned green. The door clicked open. They didn't move for a second. The reality was crashing down on them. The apartment, the view, the address, it was all mine. It had always been mine. Trey wasn't a successful consultant living the high life. He was a squatter in his father's investment portfolio. Trey walked into the apartment like a zombie. It was a beautiful space, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, modern furniture, art on the walls. Now it looked like a trap. Paige followed him. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She was in shock. "Your father," she muttered. "Your father who sweeps his own porch. Your father who wears work boots. He owns this." "I didn't know," Trey whispered. "I swear, Paige, he told me he just knew a guy. He told me he got a discount. I didn't know he owned the company." "You didn't know," Paige turned on him, her voice rising. "You didn't know your father was a multimillionaire. What kind of idiot doesn't know his own family has money? The kind whose father wanted him to build his own character," I thought from my office watching the security feed on my laptop. 30 minutes, Mr. Henderson announced from the doorway, checking his watch. "I suggest you hurry." The next half hour was a frantic, humiliating scramble. Under the watchful eyes of the guards, Trey and Paige threw clothes into suitcases. They grabbed jewelry, laptops, chargers. They didn't have time to pack properly. Silk dresses were jammed in with shoes. Suits were crumpled into balls. They left behind the furniture, the TV, the artwork. At 29 minutes, Mr. Henderson stepped in. "Time is up. Please vacate the premises." "But we aren't done," Paige protested, trying to zip a bursting suitcase. "I haven't got my shoes from the closet." "Time is up," Mr. Henderson repeated. The guards stepped forward. They didn't touch them, but their presence was enough. Trey grabbed Paige's arm. "Come on, Paige, let's go. We have to go." They dragged their bags out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind them. The light turned red again. Locked out. Homeless. They took the elevator down to the lobby in silence. The other people in the elevator, sleek professionals heading to lunch, looked at their disheveled state and their mountain of luggage with disdain. They walked out onto the street. It was raining now, a light cold drizzle that soaked into their clothes. They stood under the awning of the building they used to live in. "Where do we go?" Trey asked. Paige looked at him. Her mascara was running, her perfect hair was frizzy. "We go to a hotel," she said. "A cheap one. One that takes cash. Because that is all we have, right?" They hailed another Uber. This time they couldn't afford the luxury SUV. They got a small dented sedan that smelled of stale cigarettes. They drove to a motel on the outskirts of the city near the airport. It was the kind of place with neon signs that flickered and carpets that hadn't been cleaned since the 90s. They checked into a room with 2 double beds and a view of the parking lot. Trey paid with the last of his cash. He had $12 left. They dragged the suitcases into the room. It was small and dingy. The harsh fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Paige sat on the edge of the bed. She looked around the room. Then she looked at Trey. She reached into her purse and pulled out the engagement ring. It was a 3-carat diamond. I had paid for it. Trey had told her he saved for 2 years. She looked at the ring, then at Trey. "You are a liar," she said quietly. "Paige, I didn't lie, You said your father was a nobody. You said he was a janitor. You said you were the success story. You said you built your business. I did. I am trying." "No, Trey, you are a fraud. Your father owns the building. Your father pays the bills. Your father bought this ring, didn't he?" Trey looked down. "Yes." Paige stood up. She walked over to him. She took his hand, placed the ring in his palm, and closed his fingers over it. Then she slapped him. Hard. "You are pathetic," she spat. "You let me treat him like dirt. You let my parents treat him like dirt. And all the while he was the one holding the strings. He was the one with the power, and you were just his puppet." She grabbed her purse. "I am going to the vending machine. I need a soda, and when I come back you better have a plan to fix this. Because if I have to spend my wedding night in this dump, I am going to make you wish you were never born." She slammed the door. Trey stood alone in the motel room, clutching the ring. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror. He saw a man who had lost everything because he was ashamed of the one person who gave him everything. He sat down on the lumpy bed and put his head in his hands. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing away the illusion of his life, leaving only the cold, hard truth. And the truth was, he was broke, homeless, and alone. But the worst was yet to come, because tomorrow was the wedding, and his father had just bought the venue. The vibration of a cell phone on a cheap laminate nightstand is a distinct sound. It is a rattle that speaks of thin walls and hollow furniture. In the motel room, Trey and Paige watched their social standing evaporate one notification at a time. The rumor mill in their circle moved faster than the stock market, and the crash was just as devastating. Paige sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her screen with the horror of someone watching a car accident. Her phone was lighting up, not with congratulations, but with cancellations. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Sarah just canceled. She said she has a sudden family emergency. Sarah is the maid of honor, Trey. She is bailing on the rehearsal dinner." Trey was pacing the small room wearing the same wrinkled shirt he had slept in. "Call her back, Paige. Tell her it is fine. Tell her we fixed the venue issue. I can't call her back. She blocked my number." Another ping. Now the Millers are out. And the Vanderbilts. They heard about the car, Trey. They heard the tow truck driver made a scene. They think we are broke. They think we are frauds. Trey stopped pacing. He looked at his fiancée. Her eyes were not filled with love or concern for him. They were filled with the panic of a socialite losing her audience. "My father did this," Trey said. "He is destroying me." "Your father is a monster," Paige spat. "But my father is going to fix it. He just texted me. He secured the funding." I knew exactly what funding she was talking about. Arthur Huntington had signed the loan documents with Vantage Capital an hour ago. He had leveraged every brick of his existence against $5 million of quick cash. He thought he had outsmarted the system. He thought he had found a lifeline. He didn't know he had just signed a deal with the devil, and the devil was his son-in-law's father. Arthur Huntington did not waste time. Flush with my money, he immediately went into damage control mode. He called Trey. I have the audio log because Trey's phone is on a family plan that I pay for and monitor for security purposes. Listen to me, you incompetent boy, Arthur screamed through the receiver. You have embarrassed my daughter. You have embarrassed my name. People are talking Trey. They are saying the Blackwoods are insolvent. They are saying you are nothing but a diversity hire in your own father's company. I am not insolvent, Trey stammered. My dad just— I do not care about your dad, Arthur interrupted. Your dad is a senile gardener who forgot his place, but I have fixed it. I have booked the private room at Le Chateau for the rehearsal dinner tonight. It is the most expensive restaurant in the city. We are going to show these people that the Huntington-Blackwood alliance is drowning in money. We are going to order the vintage wine. We are going to order the caviar. You are going to put on a clean suit, shave that pathetic look off your face, and act like you own the place. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Trey whispered. And Trey Arthur added, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. If you embarrass me tonight, if you let slip that your father cut you off, I will destroy you. You are lucky we are even letting you marry Paige after this stunt. Fix your face. We eat at 7. I sat in my office and listened to the call end. Arthur was throwing a party with my money to save face while abusing my son. I looked at the clock. It was 4 in the afternoon. Le Chateau. I knew the place well. I owned the building it was housed in. I had leased the space to the chef 10 years ago. I picked up my phone. Jean-Luc, I said when the owner answered. It is Cyrus, Monsieur Blackwood. To what do I owe the honor? I understand you have a reservation for the Huntington party tonight in the Diamond Room. Yes, monsieur. A very large booking. Very last minute. They requested the grand menu. Good. I need a favor, Jean-Luc. One of your servers called in sick tonight. Did they, monsieur? I was not aware. Yes, they did, and I am going to fill in for them. There was a long silence on the line. Monsieur Blackwood, you want to wait tables. I want to ensure the quality of service for my family, Jean-Luc. I will be there at 6. Have a uniform ready. And Jean-Luc, no one knows who I am. To the staff and the guests, I am just the help. Do we understand each other? Of course, monsieur. At 6:30, I stood in the staff locker room of Le Chateau. The white waiter's jacket was tight across my shoulders. I buttoned it up. I put on a black face mask the kind service staff still wore to be polite and hygienic. It covered my beard and half my face. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like the CEO of a logistics empire. I looked like an invisible man. I looked like the man Arthur Huntington thought I was. I walked into the Diamond Room. It was a space of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. The table was set for 20 people, though only 12 had confirmed. The cancellations had cut deep. Arthur and Mrs. Huntington arrived first. They swept in like royalty, ignoring the staff completely. Arthur was wearing a tuxedo that strained at his gut. Mrs. Huntington was dripping in diamonds that I now technically owned as collateral. I stood by the wall, a bottle of sparkling water in my hand. Arthur sat at the head of the table. He looked around the room with satisfaction. This will do, he said loud enough for the busboys to hear. This will show them. Vantage Capital came through just in time. Smart fellows over there. They know a good investment when they see one. Mrs. Huntington adjusted her necklace. I still cannot believe we have to do this, Arthur. That boy Trey is a liability. His father is a liability. Did you see his house? It was a shack. It does not matter, Arthur said, waving his hand. Once the wedding is over, we consolidate. We merge the assets. Trey says the old man has a pension and the house deed is clear. We can leverage that. Trey and Paige arrived 10 minutes later. They looked like they had been through a war and lost. Paige had managed to get her hair done, but her eyes were puffy. Trey was wearing a suit that I recognized. I had bought it for his graduation. It hung loosely on him now, as if he had shrunk in the wash. They sat down. The atmosphere was frigid. Pour the wine, Arthur snapped, snapping his fingers in my direction without looking at me. The 82 Bordeaux, and keep it coming. I stepped forward. I held the bottle with a towel. My hand was steady. I poured a small amount into Arthur's glass for him to taste. He didn't even taste it. He just waved his hand. Fill it up. We need to drink to forget this morning. I moved around the table, filling glasses. I reached Trey. He didn't look up. He was staring at the tablecloth. I poured his wine. I was inches from him. My own son. He didn't recognize my hands. He didn't recognize my scent. To him, I was just part of the furniture. Arthur stood up to make a toast. The few guests who had shown up, mostly business partners, he owed money to raise their glasses. To family, Arthur boomed. To resilience. We Huntingtons do not break. We expand. And tomorrow we welcome a new member to the fold. He looked at Trey with a smile that was all teeth. Trey, stand up. Trey stood up slowly. This boy, Arthur continued, has had a rough start. He comes from humble beginnings. Very humble. But we are generous people. We are giving him a chance to elevate himself, to wash off the dirt of his upbringing. Mrs. Huntington tittered into her glass. Wash it off. Indeed, she whispered to the woman next to her. You know what they say. You can take the boy out of the hood, but you cannot take the hood out of the boy. We are going to have to work very hard to civilize him. I stood behind Mrs. Huntington holding a bottle of water. I heard every word. The woman next to her laughed. Is he bringing anything to the marriage, or is he just a charity case? Arthur heard the question. He leaned in conspiratorially. He is the entry point. Arthur said, lowering his voice. Look, the kid is soft. He is weak. He does whatever Paige tells him. That is why we picked him. He is a useful idiot. He took a large gulp of wine. Once we get access to the Blackwood accounts and Trey assures me there are hidden assets we haven't seen yet, we take control. We put the assets in Paige's name for tax purposes, obviously. And then, well, Trey can stay or go. He is a guard dog, Mrs. Huntington added, slicing her steak viciously. A little dark mongrel we keep around to fetch things. Once we have the deed to the old man's house and whatever retirement funds he has squirreled away, Trey becomes redundant. Paige can do better. She just needs the capital first. Paige was sitting right there. She heard her parents calling her future husband a mongrel, a useful idiot. She didn't defend him. She took a sip of her wine and sighed. I just want this over with, Paige said. I want the money secured. I am tired of living in uncertainty. If Trey cannot deliver, I do not know why I am bothering. Trey looked at her. Paige, he whispered. How can you let them talk about me like that? About my dad? Oh, stop being so sensitive, Trey, Paige snapped. They are just being realistic. Your dad humiliated us. He deserves whatever is coming to him. And you need to toughen up. If you want to be a Huntington, you need to stop acting like a Blackwood. Arthur laughed. Exactly. A Blackwood. What is a Blackwood anyway? It sounds like firewood. Something you burn to keep the real people warm. The table erupted in laughter. Rich, mocking laughter paid for by my loan, enjoyed in my building, fueled by my wine. I stood in the corner. I watched my son shrink into his chair. He took the abuse. He swallowed it. He accepted that he was a dog. He accepted that I was firewood. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It was the cold vacuum of space where no life can exist. I signaled to the other waiter. It was time for the main course, but I wasn't serving steak. I walked over to the sound system control panel near the service entrance. I had prepared a playlist, but first I had a serving to make. I picked up a fresh bottle of red wine. I walked over to Paige. She was wearing a white cocktail dress. It was silk. More wine, madam, I asked, my voice muffled by the mask. She didn't look at me. Just pour it. I leaned in. I tilted the bottle, but I didn't aim for the glass. I watched the dark red liquid cascade out of the bottle. It hit the rim of the glass, splashed up, and poured directly onto the lap of her white silk dress. It looked like a gunshot wound, a massive spreading stain of crimson on white. Paige screamed. She jumped up, knocking her chair over. You idiot! You clumsy idiot! Look what you did! The room went silent. Arthur slammed his hand on the table. What is wrong with you? He roared at me. You incompetent fool! Do you know how much that dress costs? I stood there holding the empty bottle. I do. I said, my voice clear and loud, dropping the fake accent I had used with the manager. It cost $2,000. Charged to a visa ending in 4598. My visa. Trey looked up. His eyes went wide. Dad. I reached up and unhooked the black mask from my ears. I let it fall to the floor. Hello, son, I said. Arthur Huntington looked at me. He looked at the waiter's jacket. He looked at my face. You, he spluttered, you are the waiter. No, Arthur, I said calmly. I am the owner. I own this building. I own the lease on this restaurant. And as of this morning, I own the debt that paid for your dinner. I looked at Paige, who was dabbing frantically at her dress with a napkin. It seems I finally fit the aesthetic, Paige. I am the help. Isn't that what you wanted? I turned to the room. But the service is over. Get out. The stain on Paige's dress was a perfect violent Rorschach test. To her it looked like a ruined wedding. To me it looked like justice. The wine had soaked instantly into the silk, turning the pristine white fabric into a dripping mess of crimson. She stared at the stain for a heartbeat, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the accident. Then her head snapped up. Her eyes found mine above the black mask. They were wide with a fury that transcended social graces. "You clumsy idiot!" she shrieked. Her hand moved faster than thought. A sharp, stinging slap connected with my cheek. It was loud enough to silence the entire room. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Do you know how much this dress costs? You are useless. Absolutely useless. My God, why do they even hire people like you? Are you blind? Or just stupid?" I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I stood there holding the empty bottle like a weapon. The slap burned, but it was a purifying fire. It burned away the last remnants of my hesitation. Paige was not finished. She grabbed a napkin and dabbed frantically at the wine, only making it worse. "Get him out of here!" she yelled at the room at large. "Someone fire him. Someone call the manager. I want him gone. I want him on the street." Arthur Huntington stood up, his face a mask of purple rage. "You heard her?" he roared. "Get out. You are a disgrace." I looked at Arthur. I looked at Paige. I looked at Trey, who was cowering in his seat, unable to look at the waiter his fiancée had just assaulted. I slowly reached up to my ear. I unhooked the elastic loop of the black mask. I let it fall from my face, drifting to the floor like a dead leaf. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of recognition. Trey's head snapped up. He squinted as if he couldn't trust his own eyes. "Dad?" he whispered. Paige froze mid-dab. She looked at my face. She looked at the waiter's uniform. "Cyrus," she breathed. I dropped the wine bottle onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, knocking over a crystal water glass. "Hello, Paige," I said, my voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "I apologize for the spill. I am out of practice. I haven't served wine since I worked as a busboy in 1982 to pay for my first truck." Arthur Huntington looked like he was having a stroke. "You," he sputtered, "you are the waiter." "No, Arthur," I corrected him. "I am the man who paid for the wine. I am the man who owns the building you are standing in. And I am the man who just watched his son sit in silence while his future wife slapped his father." Trey stood up shaking. "Dad, what are you doing here? Why are you dressed like that?" "I am dressed like this, Trey, because this is how you see me. This is how you all see me. The help, the background noise, the wallet with no face." I walked over to the small stage where a jazz trio had been playing softly in the corner. The musicians stopped playing their instruments, hanging loosely. I took the microphone from the stand. "Testing 1, 2, I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, filling the diamond room. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, addressing the room full of Huntington business associates and sycophants. "I apologize for the interruption, but I think a toast is in order." Arthur Huntington started to move towards me. "Stop this," he hissed. "Sit down, Cyrus. You are making a scene." "I am not making a scene, Arthur. I am making a statement." I pointed the microphone at him. "You called me a gardener, Arthur. You called me firewood. You laughed about washing the hood out of my son. Well, let me tell you something about the hood. In the hood, we learn to spot a hustler from a mile away. And you, Arthur, are a hustler with a bad credit score." The room gasped. Mrs. Huntington clutched her pearls. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "We are the Huntingtons." I laughed. It was a cold sound. "Yes, you are the Huntingtons. And according to the financial report I read this morning, you are the bankrupt Huntingtons. You are $5 million in debt. Your construction projects are stalled. Your assets are leveraged to the hilt. You didn't approve this marriage because you love Trey. You approved it because you needed a bailout." Arthur's face went white. "That is a lie," he shouted. "Security! Get him out." I signaled to the back of the room. The doors opened. But it wasn't hotel security. It was my personal security detail led by a man named Marcus who used to be a linebacker. They stepped into the room, crossing their arms. They weren't here for me. They were here for Arthur. "I am not done," I said into the microphone. I pulled a small remote from my pocket. I pointed it at the large projection screen behind the stage, the one that was supposed to be showing a slideshow of Trey and Paige's happy moments. Instead, the screen flickered to life with a grainy video. It was footage from inside the Huntington residence recorded 2 weeks ago. I had hired a private investigator who installed a camera in their living room disguised as a smoke detector. It is amazing what people will say when they think they are alone in their castle. The video showed Arthur and Mrs. Huntington sitting on their plush sofa, drinking martinis. "We just have to hold on until the wedding," Arthur said on the screen. "Once the knot is tied, we get access to the Blackwood Trust. Trey is an idiot. He will sign whatever we put in front of him." Mrs. Huntington laughed on the screen. "And the father, that old man, he is probably sitting on millions and doesn't even know how to spend it. We will have him declared incompetent within a year. Put him in a home. Take control of the estate. It will be easy, like taking candy from a baby." Arthur nodded on screen. "Exactly. We use Trey to get the money, then we cut him loose. Paige can divorce him in 2 years, take half, and we are set for life. He is just a stepping stone, dear. A dark little stepping stone." The video ended. The screen went black. The diamond room was silent, deadly silent. Every guest, every business partner, every friend looked at Arthur and Mrs. Huntington. They saw the naked greed, the racism, the cruelty. Trey stood by the table staring at the blank screen. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He turned slowly to look at Paige. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew they were planning this." Paige was crying again. Not fake tears this time. Real, terrified tears. "Trey, it wasn't like that. They were just talking. They didn't mean it." "Didn't mean it," I boomed into the microphone. "They called me a stepping stone. They called you an idiot. And you, Paige, you let them." Arthur Huntington roared. He lunged for the stage, his face twisted in hate. "I will kill you," he screamed. "I will ruin you." He didn't make it 3 steps. Marcus stepped forward and blocked his path. He didn't touch him. He just stood there, a wall of muscle. "Sit down, Mr. Huntington," Marcus said calmly, "or I will help you sit down." Arthur stopped panting. He looked around the room. He saw the judgment in the eyes of his peers. He saw his reputation crumbling in real time. "Get out," he whispered. "Just get out." I placed the microphone back on the stand. "I am leaving, Arthur. But before I go, I have one last announcement." I looked at the guests. "The dinner you are eating, the wine you are drinking, the room you are sitting in, it is all unpaid. Mr. Huntington's credit card was declined this morning. He financed this party with a high-interest loan from a company called Vantage Capital." I paused for effect. "I am Vantage Capital." Arthur's knees gave out. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "And, as the primary creditor, I am exercising my right to foreclose on the collateral, which includes this dinner." I looked at the staff standing by the doors. "Clear the tables. The party is over." The waiters hesitated for a second, then moved. They began clearing plates, snatching half-finished steaks and bottles of wine. The guests stood up, murmuring, outraged, confused. "This is insane," someone said. "Let's go," said another. "I don't want to be involved in this." The room emptied rapidly. The Huntingtons were left alone in the wreckage of their social standing. I walked down from the stage. I walked past Trey. He didn't look at me. He was staring at Paige, who was sobbing into her wine-stained dress. I stopped in front of Arthur. "You wanted a gardener, Arthur," I said quietly. "Well, I just pruned the dead wood." I turned and walked out the service door, leaving them in the empty, echoing room. My son, his fiancée, and the family that tried to eat him alive. The morning sun rose over the city like a spotlight turning on a crime scene. It was 8 a.m. on the day of the wedding. For most grooms, this is a time of nervous excitement and last-minute tie adjustments. For Trey, it was a time of absolute existential terror. He and Paige were sitting in the lobby of a budget motel staring at a bank statement on Trey's phone screen. It was an old screenshot from 3 years ago showing the balance of my retirement savings account at First National Bank. $200,000. It was the only money they knew about that wasn't tied to the Blackwood Holdings mainframe I had locked down. They thought it was my nest egg. They thought it was the humble savings of a man who worked with his hands. They did not know it was a dormant account I kept open solely to pay for the maintenance of my first truck, which I kept for sentimental reasons. Paige looked at the number, and her eyes gleamed with a predatory light. We get this money, she whispered. We get this money and we pay the hotel. We pay the vendors. We get back into the suite before the guests arrive at noon. We tell them it was a banking error. We save face. Trey shook his head, his face pale and clammy. We can't, Paige. That is his retirement. That is literally all he has to live on if the company fires him. Paige grabbed his face, squeezing his cheeks until his lips puckered. He doesn't need it. He has Social Security. We need it, Trey. We are drowning. My father is broke. Your father is a monster. We have to survive. You have power of attorney on that account, remember? You set it up when he had that hip surgery 5 years ago. Just walk in there, sign the slip, and take the cashier's check. Trey pulled away. I don't know if the power of attorney is still valid. It doesn't matter, Paige snapped. You are his son. You have the same last name. You know his Social Security number. Just forge it if you have to. It is our money anyway. It is my inheritance. We are just taking an advance. Desperation is a powerful drug. It can make a coward feel brave and a thief feel righteous. Trey stood up. He smoothed his wrinkled shirt. He looked at Paige, who was watching him with a mixture of expectation and contempt. He realized that if he didn't get this money, he lost her. He lost the Huntingtons. He lost the illusion of the life he wanted. Let's go, he said. They drove to First National Bank in the dented Uber. They walked through the glass doors at 9:15. The bank was quiet. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Trey walked up to the teller counter. He was sweating profusely. He approached a teller named Mrs. Gable. She was a woman in her 60s with kindly eyes and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. I had known Mrs. Gable for 30 years. She had given Trey lollipops when he was a toddler. Hello, Trey, she said, smiling warmly. I haven't seen you in years. How is your father? Trey tried to smile back, but his lip twitched. He is good, Mrs. Gable. He is great. Actually, that is why I am here. He is not feeling well today. He couldn't make it down. He needs me to make a withdrawal for some medical expenses. Mrs. Gable's smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened behind her lenses. Oh, I am sorry to hear that. What do you need? I need to close the savings account, Trey said, pushing a withdrawal slip across the counter. I need a cashier's check for the full balance, $210,000. Mrs. Gable looked at the slip. She looked at the signature at the bottom. It read Cyrus Blackwood, but the loop on the B was wrong. My signature is sharp and jagged. This was round and soft. I see, she said. And do you have the power of attorney documentation? It is on file, Trey said quickly. I filed it 5 years ago. Mrs. Gable typed into her computer. She looked at the screen. She saw the red banner flashing across the top of my profile. It was a flag I had placed there yesterday afternoon after the tow truck left my house. It read, Revoke all authorizations. Report attempted access to authorities immediately. Mrs. Gable did not blink. She did not frown. She was a professional. Ah yes, here it is, she lied smoothly. The system is just running a bit slow this morning, Trey. Since it is such a large amount, I need to get the manager to override the daily limit. It will just take a moment. Why don't you and your fiancée have a seat in the lobby? I will bring the check out to you. Trey exhaled a breath he had been holding for 10 minutes. Thank you, Mrs. Gable. Thank you so much. He turned to Paige and gave her a thumbs up. They walked over to the seating area and sat down. They held hands. They were smiling. They thought they had won. They thought they had outsmarted the old janitor. Mrs. Gable walked into the back office. She did not print a check. She pressed the silent alarm button under the desk. Then she picked up the phone and dialed the direct line for the precinct captain. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Trey checked his watch. We have to go, he muttered. We are going to be late for hair and makeup. Just wait, Paige whispered. It is 200 grand, Trey. We wait. At 12 minutes, the double doors of the bank burst open. It wasn't a team of SWAT agents. It was just 2 uniformed officers. They walked in with the casual, heavy gait of men who know exactly who they are looking for. They didn't look around. They walked straight to the seating area. Trey Blackwood, one of the officers, asked. Trey stood up. Yes. Is there a problem? Paige stood up too, trying to use her Huntington glare. Excuse me, we are waiting for a transaction. We are in a hurry. The officer ignored her. He looked at Trey. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. What? Trey backed up, knocking over a fake ficus plant. Why? You are under arrest for attempted bank fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Trey's face went white. No, you don't understand. It is my father's account. I have permission. Mrs. Gable stepped out from behind the counter. She was holding a printout. Your father revoked your authorization yesterday, Trey, she said, her voice sad but firm. He also signed an affidavit stating that any attempt by you to access these funds should be considered a criminal act. He said you might try to forge his signature. And looking at this slip, that is exactly what you did. The officer grabbed Trey's wrist and spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the quiet bank. Click, click, click. Paige screamed, "Get off him! Do you know who I am? My father is Arthur Huntington." The second officer looked at her. The same Arthur Huntington who is currently being served with an asset seizure order. "Yeah, we know him. You are under arrest too, ma'am." "Me," Paige shrieked. "I didn't sign anything. I didn't do anything." The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "We have you on the bank security camera coaching him. That is conspiracy to commit fraud. Turn around." They marched them out of the bank. It was the same bank where I had opened Trey's first junior savings account when he was 6 years old so he could learn the value of $1. Now he was leaving it in shackles because he had never learned the value of honesty. They were placed in the back of a squad car. People on the street stopped to watch. Someone filmed it on their phone. The video would be online within the hour, titled "Groom Arrested on Wedding Day." I was in my office reviewing the acquisition documents for Huntington Construction when my phone rang. It was an automated collect call from the county jail. "You have a call from an inmate, Trey Blackwood. To accept charges, press 1. I pressed 1. Dad." Trey's voice was a high-pitched panic. "Dad, you have to help me. I am in jail. They booked me, Dad. I am in a cell with a guy who is staring at me. You have to bail me out, please." I leaned back in my leather chair. I looked out the window at my garden. The roses I had planted myself were blooming. "Hello, Trey," I said calmly. "Dad, it was a mistake. I thought I still had the power of attorney. Mrs. Gable lied to me. Please, Dad, the bail is set at $50,000. I don't have it. Call a bondsman. Get me out. The wedding is in 2 hours. The wedding," I repeated. "You are still worried about the wedding." Yes, Paige is freaking out. She is in the women's holding cell screaming. "Dad, please. I am your son." I closed the file on my desk. "You are my son, Trey. That is true. But yesterday you told me I ruined the aesthetic of your life. You told me I didn't fit the image. Dad, I didn't mean it. You did mean it. And you know what, Trey? I think you were right. I don't fit the image of your high society life. And do you know what else doesn't fit that image? A father who bails out a thief. Dad, please. I am busy, Trey. I am currently auditing the financial records of a construction company I just acquired. It seems the previous owners were very careless with their accounting. I don't have time to come down there. You bought Huntington Construction, Trey whispered. I did. And I am going to clean house, starting with the management. Dad, you can't leave me here. It is cold. It smells. I looked at the clock. I suggest you get comfortable, son. Use the time to reflect. Think about the aesthetic of a prison cell. It is very minimalist, very modern. I think you will find it builds character. But the wedding is canceled, Trey. The groom is indisposed, and the bride is an accomplice. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment listening to the silence of my house. It was a heavy silence, but it was clean. It was the silence of a man who had finally stopped enabling the people who were killing him. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I made a sandwich. I ate it standing up. Then I went upstairs to change. I put on the black tuxedo again. I wasn't going to bail him out, but I was going to the wedding venue. Because even though there was no groom and no bride, there was still a party scheduled at the Huntington estate, or what used to be the Huntington estate. Paige had insisted on having the ceremony at her family's ancestral home, a plantation-style mansion on the edge of town. She didn't know that her father had leveraged the deed to that house in the loan agreement he signed yesterday. And since he had defaulted on the immediate repayment clause I triggered when he was arrested for fraud regarding the credit cards, the house now belonged to Blackwood Holdings. I checked my tie in the mirror. I looked like a man who owned the place. Because I did. I dropped the charges at 8 in the morning. It was not an act of mercy. It was a strategic necessity. A tragedy requires all the actors to be present on stage for the final act, and my son could not play his part from a holding cell. I called the district attorney who owed me a favor from a campaign contribution 3 years ago and told him I was withdrawing my complaint for the moment. I left the file open pending future review. This meant Trey was free to walk out the door, but the sword of Damocles was still hanging over his head by a very thin thread. Trey stumbled out of the precinct into the harsh morning light, looking like a man who had been chewed up and spit out by the system. His designer suit was rumpled, and he smelled of jail antiseptic. Paige was waiting for him in the parking lot. She was not there to comfort him. She was pacing back and forth in a manic frenzy, holding her phone like a weapon. She had spent the night in a state of delusional denial, convinced that she could simply willpower her way through the disaster. "Get in the car," she snapped as soon as she saw him. "We are behind schedule. The makeup artist is charging us double for the delay." Trey stood there blinking. "The wedding. You still want to do the wedding?" "Of course we are doing the wedding," Paige hissed, shoving him toward the back seat of her mother's car. "Do you think I am going to let your father win? Do you think I am going to let him cancel my day? We are Huntingtons. We do not cancel. We pivot. But we have no money," Trey whispered. "We have no venue. The hotel kicked us out." Paige smiled. It was a terrifying expression, completely devoid of joy. "We do not need the hotel. We have something better. We have the estate." The Huntington Plantation estate was the crown jewel of her family's fading empire. It sat on 50 acres of rolling hills an hour outside the city. It was an antebellum relic with white columns and weeping willows, a place Paige had bragged about since the day I met her. She claimed it was their ancestral seat, a symbol of their enduring legacy. What she did not know, and what Trey was too beaten down to ask, was that the estate had been leveraged 3 times over. Arthur Huntington had mortgaged the history right out of the walls, and when he defaulted on the emergency loan I had approved 24 hours ago, the collateral clause kicked in instantly. The deed had transferred digitally at midnight. But Paige did not know this. She was operating on the fumes of her own arrogance. She believed that the iron gates of her family home would always open for her. She believed that land ownership was in her blood, not in a bank ledger. "Drive," she ordered her mother. "We are going to the country. We are going to get married on the front lawn, just like my grandmother did. It will be vintage. It will be authentic. It will be a statement." It certainly would be a statement, just not the one she intended. I watched them leave via the traffic camera feed I had access to. Then I put on my sunglasses. I walked out to my own car, a black SUV with tinted windows. I had a 45-minute head start. I needed to be there to welcome them home. The drive to the estate was beautiful. The sun was shining through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the road. It was a perfect day for a wedding. It was also a perfect day for an eviction. I arrived at the main gate at 10. The property was impressive, I had to admit. It spoke of a time when men like Arthur Huntington ruled the world simply by being born. But times had changed. Now men like me ruled the world because we worked while they slept. My security team was already there. They had secured the perimeter. They had replaced the old padlock with a heavy-duty industrial chain. They had covered the old brass sign that read Huntington Manor with a temporary banner made of thick vinyl. I drove through the service entrance and parked behind the main house. I walked up the back stairs to the second-floor balcony that overlooked the long driveway and the sprawling front lawn. I poured myself a glass of iced tea. I stood by the railing, and I waited. The wedding convoy arrived at 11:30. It was a sad procession. A few cars of confused guests who had been text messaged the change of location at the last minute, followed by the Lincoln Navigator carrying the bride and groom. They drove up the long access road, dust kicking up behind them. They approached the main gate, expecting it to swing open as it always had. Instead, they saw the chain. The lead car stopped, then the Lincoln stopped. I watched from the balcony as Arthur Huntington jumped out of the passenger seat. He looked frantic. He ran up to the gate, shaking the iron bars. "What is this?" he screamed. "Who locked this? Open this gate!" Paige got out of the car. She was wearing her wedding dress. The hem was dragging in the dirt. She looked at the gate, then she looked at the sign covering the family crest. She read it out loud. Her voice carried on the wind. "Property of Blackwood Holdings. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." She stepped back as if the sign had burned her. "Blackwood Holdings," she whispered. Trey got out of the car slowly. He stood beside her looking at the sign. He didn't look surprised. He just looked tired. "He owns it," Trey said. "He owns everything, Paige. I told you." Arthur was trying to climb the gate, his expensive loafers slipping on the iron. This is illegal, he roared, his face turning purple. This is my house. This is my land. My grandfather built this. You cannot just lock me out of my own inheritance. I decided it was time to make my presence known. I picked up the microphone connected to the PA system that Arthur had installed years ago to make announcements at his garden parties. I flipped the switch. A sharp feedback whine cut through the air, silencing the birds and the screaming man at the gate. "Good morning, Arthur," my voice boomed across the lawn, echoing off the trees. They all looked up. They saw me standing on the balcony of their ancestral home, looking down at them like a lord surveying his peasants. I was wearing my tuxedo. I held my glass of tea. Cyrus Arthur screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Get off my balcony! Get out of my house! I will call the police! I will have you arrested for trespassing!" I leaned into the microphone. "You can call the police, Arthur. In fact, I encourage it. But I think you will find the conversation very short. You see, you are the one trespassing." I gestured to the sign on the gate. "You signed the loan agreement, Arthur. You put this house up as collateral. You defaulted at 8 a.m. this morning when the fraud investigation froze your assets. The title transfer was automatic. It is in the fine print. Clause 17, Section B. I assume you read it before you took my $5 million. Arthur fell to his knees in the dirt. He gripped the bars of the gate. "No. No, you tricked me. You predatory animal, this is my legacy. This is the Huntington seat. You cannot take my history." I took a sip of tea. "Your history is full of unpaid bills and arrogance, Arthur. And frankly, I am not interested in your history. I am interested in the real estate." Paige ran to the gate. She grabbed the bars, her knuckles white. "Cyrus, please. It is my wedding day. I have guests. I have a dress. Just let us in for the afternoon. Let us have the ceremony. We can talk about business later. Please. Do not ruin this for me." I looked down at her. She looked small from up here. "I am not ruining anything, Paige. I am saving you from a terrible mistake. You wanted a wedding at a plantation. You wanted to celebrate your heritage. Well, I am giving you a history lesson." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Do you know what I am going to do with this house, Paige?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I am going to gut it. I am going to strip the wallpaper and sell the antiques. And then I'm going to turn it into a corporate retreat. But not just any retreat." I smiled. "This is going to be the exclusive vacation center for the employees of Blackwood Logistics. Specifically for my warehouse workers and my drivers, the men and women who work with their hands, the people you think ruin your aesthetic. They are going to swim in your pool. They are going to sleep in your bedrooms. They are going to have barbecues on this lawn." Arthur let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "You wouldn't dare. You cannot put those people in my house. Those people," I replied, my voice hardening, "are the reason I have the money to buy your house, Arthur. They built my empire. You inherited yours and lost it." I signaled to the security team stationed inside the gate. "Gentlemen, clear the driveway. The former owners are blocking the entrance." 2 guards stepped forward. They didn't open the gate. They simply stood there, arms crossed, staring at the Huntingtons. Trey walked up to the gate. He put his hand on the cold iron. He looked up at me. "Dad," he said. His voice was not amplified, but in the silence of the countryside I heard him clearly. "Dad, I am sorry." I looked at him. I looked at the son who had stood by while his fiancée called me dirty. "It is too late for sorry, Trey. You made your choice. You chose the image over the man. Now you have neither." I turned off the microphone. I turned my back on them and walked back into the house. Behind me I heard the sound of Arthur wailing. I heard Paige screaming at Trey. I heard the engines of the cars starting up as the guests realized there would be no wedding, no reception, and no open bar. I walked through the empty hallways of the mansion. It smelled of old dust and decay. I walked past the portraits of dead Huntingtons glaring down at me from the walls. I took out my phone and called Silas. "Silas, it is done. Send the crews in on Monday. I want every portrait removed and burned. I want the carpets ripped out. And Silas, order a new sign for the gate. What should it say, Cyrus? Make it big, Silas. Make it gold. Have it say, the Cyrus Blackwood Center for Excellence. And put a smaller sign underneath. What should the small sign say? It should say, all are welcome. Except Huntingtons." I hung up. I sat down in Arthur's favorite leather chair in the library. It was comfortable. It felt like victory. But as I looked around the silent room, I realized that victory was cold. I had won the war, but I had lost my son. The house was mine, but it was empty. I closed my eyes. "Let them go," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them all go." But I wasn't done yet. Arthur Huntington still had a company. Or he thought he did. And Paige still thought she could divorce Trey and find another rich fool. I had to make sure that the lesson stuck. I had to make sure they had nowhere left to run. The next phase was not about real estate, it was about reputation. And I was about to destroy theirs completely. The sirens that cut through the country's silence were not coming to save the Huntingtons. They were coming to liquidate them. I stood on the balcony and watched as 2 sheriff cruisers pulled up behind the line of stalled wedding cars. Silas stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was not wearing a tuxedo, he was wearing his courtroom armor, a charcoal gray suit that cost more than the average settlement he negotiated. He carried a leather briefcase that contained the end of Arthur Huntington's life as a free man. Arthur saw the badges and visibly relaxed. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. He turned to Paige and Trey with a smug smile that was painful to witness. Finally, Arthur said, straightening his jacket, "The authorities are here. Now we will see who the real criminal is. That man is holding us hostage on our own property. Officer over here, arrest that man on the balcony." The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man named Miller, walked past Arthur without breaking stride. He walked up to the heavy chains securing the gate and nodded to my security team. They unlocked it. The gate swung open with a heavy groan. Arthur beamed. "Thank you, Sheriff. I want to file charges immediately. Trespassing, harassment, grand theft of real estate." Sheriff Miller stopped in front of Arthur. He did not pull out a notepad. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Arthur Huntington," he asked. "That is me," Arthur replied, puffing out his chest. "I am the victim here." Silas stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. "Mr. Huntington, my name is Silas Vance, representing Blackwood Holdings and Vantage Capital. This is a writ of execution and immediate asset seizure issued by the Superior Court 30 minutes ago." Arthur blinked. "Seizure? What are you talking about?" "You defaulted on a secured loan this morning," Silas explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "The terms of the loan included a universal cross-collateralization clause. That means when you failed to make the immediate solvency deposit triggered by the fraud investigation against your daughter and son-in-law, you triggered a total liquidation event." "Liquidation," Arthur laughed nervously. It was a high, thin sound. "You cannot liquidate me. I am a corporation." "You signed a personal guarantee," Silas corrected him. "You pledged your personal assets, all of them, to secure the funds for this wedding." Sheriff Miller stepped in. "Mr. Huntington, I have a court order to seize all liquid assets and personal property on site to satisfy the judgment. That includes vehicles, jewelry, and luxury goods." Arthur took a step back, stumbling over the hem of Paige's ruined dress. "You are crazy. You cannot take my things." I watched from the balcony as the deputies moved in. It was a surgical operation. One deputy walked over to the Lincoln Navigator. "Keys," the deputy demanded. "This is a rental," Arthur lied. Silas checked his tablet. "Actually, Mr. Huntington, you purchased this vehicle through the company account 3 months ago. It is listed as a company asset. Since the company is now in receivership, the car belongs to us. Keys." Arthur threw the keys at the deputy. "Fine, take the car. We will take an Uber." The deputy caught the keys. "Thank you." "Now the watch." Arthur covered his left wrist. "This is a Patek Philippe. It was a gift from my father. It is a $50,000 asset," Silas said. "Hand it over." Arthur looked at me. He looked up at the balcony where I stood, watching him like a judge from on high. "Cyrus," he screamed, "stop this! This is barbaric!" I set my tea glass down on the railing. I walked to the stairs. I descended slowly, 1 step at a time. The sound of my shoes on the wooden steps was the only rhythm in the chaotic scene. I walked across the lawn. The grass was soft under my feet. I walked through the open gate. I stood in front of Arthur. He was clutching his wrist, protecting his watch like it was his soul. Mrs. Huntington was screaming as a female deputy asked her to remove her diamond necklace. "You are hurting me," she shrieked. "These are family heirlooms." "They are collateral," Silas said. I looked at Arthur. He was shaking. He looked old. The veneer of power had been stripped away, leaving only a frightened, greedy man. You signed the paper, Arthur, I said softly. You read the fine print. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you were so arrogant you thought the rules didn't apply to you. You thought you could take my money, spend it on a party to mock me, and never pay it back. I intend to pay it back, Arthur hissed. I just need time. You had time. You had 40 years to build something real. Instead, you built a house of cards and tried to make my son live in it. Give him the watch, Arthur. Arthur looked at the deputy, then at me. Slowly, painfully, he unclasped the watch. He handed it over. His wrist looked pale and naked without the heavy gold weight. Is that enough? He asked, tears of rage in his eyes. Are you happy now, Cyrus? You have stripped me naked. Not yet, I said. I leaned in close. I wanted him to smell the coffee on my breath. I wanted him to see the calluses on the hands he despised. You called me a gardener, Arthur, I whispered. You said I was fit only to sweep your porch. Arthur flinched. Well, I continued, my voice dropping to a growl. You were right. I am a gardener, and I know a weed when I see one. You have been choking the life out of my son. You have been poisoning the soil of my family, so I am pulling you out by the roots. I stepped back. And Arthur? I added, gesturing to the sprawling estate behind me, the house he had lost, the land he had squandered. You do not have a garden anymore. Arthur stared at me. His face went from red to gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hand went to his chest. He grabbed his lapel, his fingers clawing at the expensive fabric. He made a sound like a wet gasp. Then his knees buckled. He didn't fall gracefully like they do in the movies. He collapsed like a sack of wet cement. He hit the dirt face first. Dad Paige screamed. She dropped to her knees beside him. She turned him over. His eyes were open but rolled back in his head. He was gasping for air, his chest heaving with irregular, terrifying spasms. Daddy, breathe! Paige yelled, slapping his face. Mrs. Huntington pushed the deputy aside and ran to her husband. Arthur! Arthur! Get up! Stop joking! This is not funny! It wasn't a joke. It was a massive cardiac event brought on by the sudden and total destruction of his ego. The stress of the debt, the humiliation of the seizure, and the realization that he was penniless had stopped his heart as effectively as a bullet. Call an ambulance, Trey shouted. He was standing over them, looking useless and terrified. Sheriff Miller was already on his radio. Dispatch, we have a medical emergency at the Huntington estate. Male subject 60s, possible cardiac arrest. Send EMS immediately. I stood there and watched. I did not move to help. I know CPR. I have been certified for 20 years. It is a requirement for running a safe warehouse. But I did not kneel down. I did not offer my breath to the man who had tried to steal my life. I watched as the deputies loosened his tie. I watched as Paige screamed at me. You did this, she shrieked, her voice raw. You killed him, you murderer. I looked at her. He killed himself, Paige, I said calmly. Greed is a heavy burden. His heart just couldn't carry it anymore. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. The paramedics swarmed the scene, pushing Paige and Mrs. Huntington aside. They cut open Arthur's shirt, ruining the linen suit he was so proud of. They stuck pads to his chest. Clear, one of them shouted. Reviewing the scene, it was a perfect tableau of tragedy. The bride in a dirt-stained dress. The mother-in-law stripped of her jewels. The father dying in the driveway of the house he no longer owned. They loaded Arthur onto a stretcher. He was unconscious but alive. The monitor was beeping a frantic, irregular rhythm. Mrs. Huntington tried to climb into the ambulance. I am his wife, she sobbed. I have to go with him. The paramedic stopped her. Ma'am, we need room to work. You will have to follow us to the hospital. She turned to look for her car, but the Lincoln was already being hooked up to a tow truck that had arrived with the sheriff. My car, she wailed. How am I supposed to get to the hospital? Trey stepped forward. He looked at me. He didn't ask for the keys to my SUV. He knew better. He grabbed Paige's arm. Come on, we will call a car. We have to go. Paige spun on him. She shoved him away so hard he stumbled. Don't touch me, she screamed. This is your fault. This is all your fault. If you hadn't been such a weak, pathetic liar, none of this would have happened. You let your father do this. You let him kill my dad. Paige Trey pleaded. I didn't know. You never know anything, Paige spat. That is your problem. You are useless. You are broke. And now you are alone. She turned to her mother. Come on, Mom. We are walking to the main road. We will hitchhike if we have to. Anything is better than being near these people. Paige and Mrs. Huntington began to walk down the long driveway following the ambulance that was speeding away with lights flashing. They were walking in expensive heels on a dirt road, leaving behind the wreckage of their wedding. Trey stood alone in the driveway. He looked at the retreating figures of the women he had tried so hard to impress. Then he turned and looked at me. I stood by my black SUV. I opened the door. "Dad," Trey said, his voice barely a whisper. I looked at him. I saw the ruin in his eyes. I saw the realization that he had bet on the wrong horse and lost everything. "Do not call me Dad," I said. "Not until you earn the name." I got in the car and started the engine. I drove past him. I drove past the bride walking in the dirt. I drove past the ambulance. I was going to the hospital, not to visit Arthur. I was going there to make sure the hospital administrator knew that Mr. Huntington's health insurance had been canceled along with his company policy an hour ago. If they were going to save his life, they were going to have to bill him directly. And since I had just seized his bank accounts, that was going to be a very complicated conversation. The Huntington empire had not just fallen, it had been erased. And I held the eraser. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed with a sickly buzzing sound. Trey sat on a plastic chair, his head in his hands. He smelled of sweat and defeat. The events of the last 48 hours swirled in his mind like a fever dream. The declined card, the towed car, the locked penthouse, the jail cell, the seized mansion, and finally, his father-in-law collapsing in the dirt. A door swung open and a doctor stepped out. He looked tired. "Family of Arthur Huntington," he called out. Mrs. Huntington stood up, her hands shaking. "Is he alive?" "He is stable," the doctor said. "It was a massive myocardial infarction, but we caught it in time. However, there is a complication with the admission. His insurance has been flagged as inactive. We need a deposit to continue treatment. A significant one." Mrs. Huntington turned to Paige. "Call Trey's father," she demanded. "Call him right now. Tell him if he doesn't pay, Arthur will die." Paige didn't reach for her phone. She turned slowly to look at Trey. Her face was a mask of cold fury. The makeup she had carefully applied that morning was streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes were dry. "Trey," she said, her voice dangerously low, "do you have any money? Any money at all?" Trey looked up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it. "I have $12, he whispered. Paige laughed. It was a harsh grating sound that made the other people in the waiting room look away. $12. My father is dying because your father destroyed him and you have $12. Paige Trey started standing up, reaching for her. "I am sorry, I didn't know." She slapped his hand away. Then she slapped his face. Harder than she had slapped me at the rehearsal dinner. "You didn't know," she screamed. "That is your answer for everything, isn't it? You are a useless, pathetic little man. Do you think I married you for your personality? Do you think I loved you?" The words hung in the air, brutal and final. "I married you because I thought you were a Blackwood," Paige hissed, leaning into his face. "I thought you came with a trust fund. I thought you came with a safety net. I endured your boring stories and your desperate need for approval because I thought there was a payout at the end." Trey stared at her, his cheek red from the slap. "You never loved me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Love?" Paige scoffed. "Love is for people who can afford it. I needed security. And you lied to me. You are not a rich heir. You are a broke fraud with a vindictive father." She pulled the engagement ring off her finger. The 3-carat diamond I had paid for. She threw it at him. It bounced off his chest and clattered onto the linoleum floor. "I want a divorce," she said. "I am filing the papers tomorrow. Annulment based on fraud. Now get out of my sight. Get out of this hospital. If I see you again, I will call security." Mrs. Huntington nodded in agreement. "Leave us alone, boy. You have done enough damage." Trey stood there for a moment. He looked at the ring on the floor. He looked at the woman he had tried to impress for 2 years. He realized with a sickening clarity that she was right. He was useless. He had built his entire identity on a lie, and now the lie was gone. He didn't pick up the ring. He turned and walked out of the waiting room. He walked past the nurse's station. He walked out the automatic doors into the night. It was raining again, a heavy, cold downpour that soaked him to the bone in seconds. He didn't call an Uber. He didn't have the money. He started walking. He walked for 3 hours. He walked through the city streets, past the closed shops and the darkened windows. He walked until his designer shoes were ruined and his feet were bleeding. He walked until he reached a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. My neighborhood. It was 2 in the morning when he arrived at my townhouse. The lights were off. The house was dark and silent. Trey walked up the driveway. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the doorbell. He knew I wouldn't answer. He dropped to his knees on the wet pavement. He knelt there in the rain, head-bowed hands resting on his thighs. He looked like a penitent monk. He looked like a man who had finally hit rock bottom. Inside the house, I was awake. I was watching him on the security monitor in my office. The camera feed was black and white, grainy in the low light. I could see the rain hitting his back. I could see him shivering. A part of me, the father part, wanted to open the door. I wanted to bring him inside, dry him off, and give him a hot meal. I wanted to tell him it was going to be okay. But the other part of me, the man who had built an empire from nothing, knew that would be the worst thing I could do. If I opened that door now, I would be saving him again. I would be teaching him that no matter how badly he messed up, Daddy would always be there to fix it. And that was a lesson that had almost destroyed him. I picked up the microphone for the intercom system. "Trey," I said, my voice coming out of the small speaker by the door. "Go home." Trey looked up at the camera. His face was wet with rain and tears. "I don't have a home, Dad," he sobbed. "Paige left me. She kicked me out. I have nowhere to go." "That is not my problem," I said. "You chose the Huntingtons. You chose their lifestyle. You chose their values. Now you have to live with the consequences." "Dad, please," Trey begged. "I am sorry. I was wrong. They are monsters. You were right about everything. Just let me in. Let me sleep on the couch. I will do anything." I watched him on the screen. He looked so small, so broken. "No," I said firmly. "You will not sleep on my couch. You will not eat my food. You are a grown man, Trey. Figure it out." "Dad, I have nothing," Trey cried. "I have $12. "Then you have $12 more than I had when I started," I replied. "Use it wisely." "But Dad, where will I go?" "Go back to the hospital," I said. "Sit in the waiting room. Be there for your father-in-law. Show them what a real man does when things get tough. Show them that even without money, you have character." "I can't," Trey whispered. "They hate me." "Then make them respect you," I said. "Or leave. Find a shelter. Find a job. But do not come back here until you understand what it means to earn your place in this world." Trey stared at the camera. He waited for me to relent. He waited for the click of the lock. But the lock didn't click. Slowly, painfully, he stood up. His legs were stiff. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at the door one last time. "Okay, Dad," he said softly. "Okay." He turned and walked back down the driveway. He walked into the darkness of the street, a solitary figure in the rain. I watched him until he disappeared from the camera view. Then I turned off the monitor. I sat in the dark for a long time. My heart ached. It is a terrible thing to close the door on your own child, but sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them fall. Trey was about to enter the hardest period of his life. He was going to know hunger. He was going to know cold. He was going to know shame. But if he survived it, he would know something else too. He would know his own strength. And that was a gift worth more than any trust fund. 3 months is a long time to live in a car. It is 90 days of waking up with a stiff neck and condensation on the windows. It is 90 days of washing your face in the bathroom of a gas station while the attendant watches you with suspicion. It is 90 days of realizing that the world does not owe you a living. I tracked Trey through the GPS on the prepaid phone he bought with his last $12. He had purchased a rusted 2004 Honda Accord from a scrapyard for $500 he earned day laboring at a construction site. It had a cracked windshield and the heater did not work. He parked it behind a 24-hour gym, hoping to use their Wi-Fi to apply for jobs. I read the reports from my private investigator. Trey applied to 40 executive positions in the first week. He walked into marketing firms and consultancy groups wearing his one remaining suit, which was growing increasingly stained. He sat across from hiring managers and told them he was the CEO of Trey Consulting. They asked for his portfolio. They asked for his references. He gave them nothing but charm and buzzwords. They showed him the door. By the second month, he was applying for shift manager positions at fast food restaurants. They told him he was overqualified and would likely quit as soon as he found something better. They were right about the quitting part, but wrong about the something better. There was nothing better waiting for him. By the third month, the suit was gone. He sold it to a consignment shop for $40 to buy gas and ramen noodles. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt he found at a thrift store. He was thin. His eyes were hollow. He had stopped looking for a career and started looking for survival. He ended up at the industrial park on the south side of the city. It is a grid of concrete warehouses and loading docks where the air smells of diesel and exhaust. He walked into a temp agency called Labor Ready. He didn't ask for a management role. He asked for work, any work. They sent him to the Icebox. The Icebox is the nickname for Distribution Center 4. It is a massive cold storage facility that processes frozen seafood for the entire tri-state area. The temperature on the floor is kept at a constant 10 degrees below zero. It is a brutal, unforgiving environment. The turnover rate for new hires is 80% in the first week. Men quit after their first break because their fingers go numb and their spirit freezes. Trey did not know that Distribution Center 4 is a subsidiary of Blackwood Logistics. He did not know that the paycheck he was desperate for was signed by a payroll company I owned. He just saw a help wanted sign and a chance to eat. He was assigned to the loading dock. His job was to unload pallets of frozen crab legs from the incoming trucks and stack them in the deep freeze. The boxes weighed 50 pounds each. He had to move 400 boxes a shift. His supervisor was a man named Buck. Buck was a giant of a man with a red beard and a temper that ran hot to compensate for the cold air. He hated college boys. He hated anyone who looked like they had ever sat behind a desk. He took one look at Trey's soft hands and decided to break him. "Move it, Princess," Buck screamed on Trey's first day. "The truck ain't gonna unload itself. You think you are too good for this. You think you are special. You are nothing. You are a pair of hands and a strong back, and right now you are failing at both." Trey dropped a box. It split open, spilling frozen crab legs onto the concrete floor. Buck was on him in a second. He grabbed Trey by the collar of his thermal jacket and shoved him against the wall. "You pay for that," Buck growled. "That comes out of your check. Now pick it up. Pick it up with your teeth if you have to." I watched the security footage later. I saw my son, the boy who used to complain if his steak was slightly overcooked, get down on his hands and knees. I saw him gather the frozen seafood, his fingers shaking. I saw him look up at Buck, not with defiance, but with fear. He didn't quit. He finished the shift. He worked 12 hours. When he clocked out, his hands were blistered and raw. He walked to his car in the parking lot, ate a cold sandwich, and slept in the back seat. He was back at the dock at 6 a.m. the next morning. He worked for 2 weeks without a day off. He lost 15 pounds. The softness in his face began to disappear, replaced by the sharp angles of exhaustion. He stopped talking about his past. He stopped checking his phone for messages from his old friends. He became a ghost in a high-visibility vest. Then came the afternoon that tested his resolve more than the cold ever could. It was a Friday. Trey was on trash duty. It was the lowest job in the warehouse. He had to drag the heavy bags of fish guts and broken packaging from the processing floor out to the compactor in the rear lot. He was covered in slime. He smelled of ammonia and rotting fish. He was dragging a particularly heavy bag across the asphalt, his boots slipping on a patch of oil. A car pulled into the lot. It wasn't a truck. It was a red Camaro convertible, flashy and loud. It parked in the reserved spot marked Supervisor. Trey stopped. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dirty sleeve. He looked at the car. The passenger door opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing tight jeans and a low-cut top that was inappropriate for the industrial setting. Her hair was bleached a platinum blonde that looked brittle in the sunlight. She was chewing gum. It was Paige. She looked different. The Huntington elegance was gone, replaced by a harder, cheaper edge. She looked like someone who was trying too hard to prove she hadn't fallen. She was holding a fast food bag. She leaned against the car, checking her makeup in the side mirror. Trey stood frozen near the dumpster. He wanted to run. He wanted to hide behind the compactor, but his legs wouldn't move. Buck walked out of the warehouse exit. He had taken off his work coat, revealing a tight t-shirt that showed off his tattoos. He walked with a swagger that said he owned the concrete he walked on. "Hey, babe," Buck called out. "You bring me my lunch." Paige turned and smiled. It was a flirtatious, hungry smile. "Yeah, I got your burger. And I got your fries." Buck walked up to her. He grabbed her by the waist and kissed her. It was a possessive, sloppy kiss right there in the parking lot. Trey made a noise, a small, involuntary gasp of shock. Paige pulled away from Buck. She looked over Buck's shoulder. Her eyes narrowed. She squinted against the sun. Then she saw him. Her eyes went wide. She took a step back. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "Oh my God," she said. "Look who it is." Buck turned around. He saw Trey standing by the trash. "What are you looking at?" Black Boy Buck shouted. "Get back to work." Paige laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. "Wait, Buck. Look, it is Trey. It is my ex-husband." Buck looked at Trey, then back at Paige. "The rich kid, the one who cried at the bank." Paige nodded. She walked towards Trey, her hips swaying. She stopped 5 feet away from him, wrinkling her nose at the smell coming from the garbage bag. "Look at you, Trey. You look appropriate. Finally found a job that matches your skill set, I see. Moving trash." Trey gripped the bag. His knuckles were white. "Hello, Paige," he said, his voice raspy. "So this is where you landed," she said, looking him up and down. "I heard you were sleeping in your car." "Is that true? Are you homeless, Trey?" "I am working," Trey said. "I am making a living. You are moving fish guts," Paige corrected him. "You are a janitor, just like your father. I guess the apple really doesn't fall far from the tree. Although at least your father owns the building. You just clean it." Buck walked up behind her and wrapped his arm around her neck. "He bothering you, babe?" "No," Paige said, leaning into him. "He isn't bothering me. He is just reminding me how lucky I am to be with a real man now. A man with a job. A man who can actually pay for dinner." She looked at Trey with pure venom. "You know, Trey, I should thank you. If you hadn't been such a fraud, I might have been stuck with you. Instead, I found Buck. He takes care of me." Trey looked at Buck. The man who screamed at him for 12 hours a day. The man who stole his wages for broken boxes. This was who Paige had chosen. This was the level she had fallen to. For a moment, Trey wanted to fight. I saw his fists clench. I saw the old Trey, the arrogant Trey, rise up in his eyes. He wanted to scream that he was a Blackwood, that his father owned the company, that Buck was nothing. But then he looked at the red Camaro. He looked at Paige's cheap dyed hair. He looked at his own dirty boots. He realized that fighting for her validation was what had destroyed him in the first place. He took a deep breath. He released his fists. "I am happy for you, Paige," Trey said. "You deserve each other." Paige's smile faltered. She expected him to beg. She expected him to cry. Whatever loser she spat. "Go clean something." Buck laughed. "Yeah, get back to work before I dock your pay." They turned and walked toward the warehouse entrance, leaving Trey alone by the dumpster. Trey watched them go. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He picked up the heavy bag of trash. He swung it into the compactor with a grunt of effort. He hit the button. The hydraulic press whirred to life, crushing the waste. He turned and walked back toward the loading dock. He walked with his head up. He was dirty. He was exhausted. He was humiliated. But he was still standing. I watched it all from the security camera in my office. I zoomed in on his face as he walked back into the cold. There was something new in his eyes. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't entitlement. It was resolve. He had passed the first test. He had refused to engage with the ghosts of his past. Now it was time for the final exam. I picked up my phone and called the general manager of the logistics division. "It is Cyrus," I said. "I want you to create a situation at Distribution Center 4. A temptation. I want to see if my son has truly learned the difference between price and value." The night shift at the icebox was usually a symphony of humming compressors and the beep of forklifts. But at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the warehouse fell into a heavy silence. Trey was stacking crates of premium Alaskan king crab near the loading bay door. His breath fogged in the freezing air. His fingers inside his gloves were numb, but his mind was sharp. He had been working here for 3 months now. He knew the rhythm of the place, and tonight the rhythm was off. Buck walked out of the supervisor's office. He wasn't wearing his safety vest. He was wearing a leather jacket, and he looked nervous. He looked around the floor, scanning for cameras, scanning for witnesses. He spotted Trey. He waved him over. Trey walked slowly. His boots crunched on the frost that coated the concrete. He didn't trust Buck. No one trusted Buck. But when the man who signs your timesheet calls you, you answer. Buck led him to the blind spot behind the generator room. It was the one place in the facility where the security cameras didn't reach. A black van was parked outside the emergency exit door, which was propped open with a brick. Buck turned to Trey. He lit a cigarette, the cherry glowing red in the dark. "You look tired, kid," Buck said. "You look like a man who is tired of sleeping in a car." "I am fine," Trey said, keeping his distance. "Don't lie to me." Buck laughed. "I know you are starving. I saw you eating the expired sandwiches from the break room vending machine. I know you owe money. Paige tells me everything. She says you are drowning." Trey stiffened at the mention of Paige. "What do you want, Buck?" "I want to help you," Buck said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He slapped it against Trey's chest. "Take it." Trey took the envelope. It was thick. He opened the flap. Inside was a stack of $100 bills. It was more money than Trey had seen in 6 months. It was probably $5,000. "What is this?" Trey asked. "It is an advance," Buck said, smiling. "A signing bonus. See that van? In 10 minutes a forklift is going to bring out 3 pallets of bluefin tuna, top grade. Sushi market stuff. Each pallet is worth 50 grand. All you have to do is open the door. Just pull the brick away, let them load it, and then put the brick back. You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. You were in the bathroom." Trey looked at the money. $5,000. That money could buy him a room in a boarding house for 6 months. It could buy him a suit for interviews. It could fix the heater in his car. It could buy him dignity. "Paige says you don't have the stomach for the real world," Buck sneered, blowing smoke into Trey's face. "She says you are soft. Prove her wrong. Take the money. Be a man." Buck turned and walked back toward the forklift, leaving Trey alone in the shadows with the envelope. Trey looked down at the cash. The bills were crisp. They were clean. But they felt heavy. He looked at his hands. They were no longer the soft, manicured hands of a consultant. They were cracked. The knuckles were swollen from the cold. There was dirt under the nails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. They were ugly hands. But as he looked at them, he saw something else. He saw a memory. He remembered being 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, watching me count out the cash from my first big contract. I had laid the bills out in neat stacks. I had looked at Trey and said, "Son, there are 2 kinds of money in this world. There is clean money, which smells like sweat and effort. And there is dirty money, which smells like fear. You can wash your hands, Trey, but you can never wash your money." Trey brought the envelope to his nose. It smelled like stale tobacco and Buck's cheap cologne. It smelled like fear. He looked at the van. He looked at the open door. He realized that this wasn't just a theft. This was a test. Not a test from me, but a test from the universe. If he took this money, he would be exactly what Arthur Huntington said he was. A hustler, a thief, a fraud. He would be proving Paige right. He would be proving that his character was for sale and the price was $5,000. But if he walked away, he would be cold, he would be hungry, but he would be clean. Trey closed the envelope. He shoved it into his pocket, but not to keep it. He walked back onto the main floor. He moved quietly. He hid behind a stack of crates. He pulled out his cheap prepaid phone. The camera lens was scratched, but it still worked. He waited. 5 minutes later, Buck came driving the forklift. He was carrying the pallets of tuna. He drove them straight to the emergency exit. 2 men jumped out of the black van. They started loading the fish. Trey held up his phone. Click. He took a picture of the license plate. Click. He took a picture of Buck shaking hands with the driver. Click. He took a picture of the inventory codes on the boxes. He recorded it all. Then he went to the break room computer. It was an ancient desktop used for logging hours. He logged into the company intranet. He found the anonymous ethics hotline email address. He attached the photos. He typed a short message. Theft in progress at Distribution Center 4. Supervisor involved. Check the inventory logs for the last 6 months. He hit send. He stood up. He felt lighter. He felt hungry, but he felt strong. He walked back out to the loading dock. The van was gone. Buck was putting the brick back in place, kicking the door shut. Buck turned and saw Trey standing there. He smiled. "Smart kid," Buck said, walking over. "I knew you wanted to eat. You kept the money right." Trey reached into his pocket. He pulled out the white envelope. Buck held out his hand, expecting a high five or a nod of conspiracy. Instead, Trey threw the envelope. He threw it hard. The flap opened, and the $100 bills exploded into the air, fluttering down like expensive confetti onto the dirty concrete floor. "I don't want your money, Buck," Trey said, his voice steady and loud. "And I don't want your charity. I am not a thief. And I am not soft." Buck looked at the money on the floor. His smile vanished. His face twisted into a mask of pure violence. "You little snitch," he hissed. "What did you do?" "I sent the photos," Trey said. "I sent them to corporate. They have the license plate. They have you." Buck didn't think. He reacted. He was a cornered animal, and Trey was the reason. He lunged. Buck was 50 pounds heavier than Trey, and he fought dirty. He tackled Trey to the ground, his fist connecting with Trey's jaw with a sickening crack. Trey's head slammed against the concrete. Stars exploded in his vision. Buck was on top of him, punching him over and over. "You ruined everything," Buck screamed. "I am going to kill you." Trey tried to block the blows, but he was exhausted and weak from months of malnutrition. He felt his nose break. He felt a rib crack. He tasted blood, warm and metallic, but he didn't beg. He didn't cry out. He swung back. He landed a solid punch on Buck's ear. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it was enough to show he was fighting. Buck grabbed a heavy metal tape dispenser from a nearby table. He raised it high, aiming for Trey's temple. This wasn't a beating anymore. It was an execution. Trey closed his eyes. He thought of me. He thought about the porch light he had walked away from. He hoped I would know that in the end he hadn't sold out. Suddenly the warehouse doors burst open. It wasn't the police. It was the Blackwood Security Response Team. They didn't shout freeze. They didn't ask questions. They moved with military precision. A taser dart hit Buck in the chest. He convulsed and dropped the metal dispenser, which clattered harmlessly to the floor. 2 guards were on him, instantly pinning him to the ground, zip-tying his hands behind his back. Another guard knelt beside Trey. "Mr. Blackwood, can you hear me? Stay down, sir. Help is here." Trey opened one swollen eye. He looked at the guard. He looked at the logo on the guard's vest. It was the Blackwood crest, the oak tree, and the shield. "My dad sent you," Trey whispered through his split lip. The guard nodded. "Yes, sir. He has been watching the feed. He saw everything." Trey tried to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate. "Tell him," Trey wheezed, coughing up a speck of blood. "Tell him I didn't take the money." "We know, sir." "We saw." Buck was screaming obscenities as they dragged him away. He was yelling about Paige, about the money, about how unfair it was. Trey lay on the cold concrete floor. His body was broken. He was in agony, but as he looked up at the warehouse lights blurring above him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt clean. He had passed the test. He had faced the temptation that had destroyed Arthur Huntington, and he had rejected it. He had chosen integrity over survival. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later. They loaded him onto a stretcher. The ride to the hospital was a blur of lights and sirens. He woke up in a private room. It wasn't the charity ward, it was a VIP suite. There were flowers by the bed. There was a nurse checking his vitals. And sitting in the chair in the corner watching him with an unreadable expression was a man in a navy blue suit. Trey blinked. "Dad." I stood up. I walked over to the bed. I looked down at his bruised face, his bandaged ribs, his swollen hands. "You look terrible, son," I said. Trey let out a weak laugh that turned into a groan. "I feel terrible." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a crumpled white envelope, the same one he had thrown at Buck. The security team had gathered up the bills. I dropped the envelope on the bedside table. $5,000, I said. "That is a lot of money for a homeless man to throw away." "I didn't earn it," Trey said, his voice raspy. "No, you didn't. But you earned something else." I pulled a chair closer and sat down. "You stood up for my company, Trey. You protected my assets. You took a beating for a business you thought didn't care about you." "I did it for me," Trey said. "I did it because I was tired of being a fraud. I wanted to be like you." I looked at him. I saw the resemblance for the first time in a long time. Not just in the nose or the chin, but in the eyes of a man who has been knocked down and got back up. "You are not like me, Trey," I said softly. "You are better. I never had to fight my way back from where you were. I started at the bottom, but I never fell from the top. You did, and you climbed back up without a rope." Trey's eyes filled with tears. "Does this mean I can come home?" I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. "No," I said. Trey's face fell. The hope vanished. "You cannot come home because you have a job to do." I tossed a hard hat onto the bed. It was white. It said manager on the front. I am transferring you, Trey. We have a logistics hub in Anchorage, Alaska. It is the toughest facility in the network. The cold breaks machines and it breaks men. They need a manager who understands the floor, someone who knows what it is like to move boxes in the freezing dark. Alaska. Trey whispered. Yes. The pay is $45,000 a year. You pay your own rent. You buy your own food. You drive your own truck. Trey looked at the hard hat. He ran his damaged fingers over the brim. It is a job, he asked. A real job. It is a career, I corrected him. If you survive 2 years, if you turn that facility around, if you show me you can lead men like Buck without getting hit in the face, then we will talk about the corporate office. Then we will talk about the legacy. Trey looked up at me. He smiled. It was a crooked, painful smile, but it was real. When do I start? As soon as you can walk. The plane leaves Monday. I turned to leave. I reached the door and stopped. Trey. Yes, Dad. You fit the image, I said. I walked out of the room. I walked down the hospital corridor. I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. I pulled out my phone and called Silas. Silas, it is Cyrus. Trey is going to Alaska. Excellent news, sir. And the Huntingtons. Arthur survived the heart attack. He is in recovery. Send him the final bill, Silas. Foreclose on the rest. I want them out of the city by the end of the month. And Paige. Paige is currently being investigated for receiving stolen goods thanks to her association with Buck. Let the police handle her. She is not our concern anymore. Understood, Cyrus. Anything else? Yes, Silas. Set up a new trust fund. Put the $500,000 I was going to give him for the wedding into it. Let it grow interest. For Trey, sir. No, Silas. For his children. Because if he keeps this up, he is going to be a father worth having. And I want to be a grandfather they can be proud of. I hung up. I walked out into the sunlight. The air was crisp. It was a good day for business. It was a good day for a gardener. I had pruned the rot. I had watered the roots. And now, finally, I could watch my garden grow. The summons came 3 days later. It was not a get well card. It was a formal email sent to the temporary account Trey had set up on a library computer. It was brief and cold. It stated that Trey Blackwood, employee number 7492, was required to report to the corporate headquarters of Blackwood Holdings at 9 a.m. sharp for a disciplinary hearing regarding the incident at the warehouse. Trey read the email on his cracked phone screen while sitting on the edge of his hospital bed. He was being discharged. His ribs were taped. His jaw was wired shut on one side, but he could speak if he was careful. His face was a map of bruises, ranging from purple to angry yellow. He knew what this meant. He was going to be fired. In the corporate world, you do not get a medal for getting into a fistfight on the loading dock, even if you were fighting a thief. You get a liability notice and a security escort out of the building. He had no clothes other than the blood-stained work shirt and jeans he had arrived in. The nurse, a kind woman who reminded him of Mrs. Gable at the bank, found him a set of scrubs and a donated windbreaker. He looked like a drifter. He looked like exactly what the Huntingtons said he was. He took the bus to the city center. He walked into the lobby of the Blackwood Tower. It was a glass and steel fortress that pierced the sky. He had walked past this building 1,000 times in his former life. He had even bragged to Paige that he knew people who worked here. He never knew that the man who built it was the same man who made him mow the lawn on Saturdays. The security guard at the front desk looked at Trey's battered face and the cheap windbreaker. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, his hand hovering near his radio. "I have a meeting." Trey mumbled, his jaw aching. "With the CEO." The guard looked skeptical. He asked for Trey's name. He typed it into the system. His eyebrows shot up. "Go right up, sir. Top floor. They are expecting you." Trey rode the elevator alone. His ears popped as the floors ticked by. 10, 20, 40, 60. The doors opened onto a reception area that smelled of leather and money. A severe woman with glasses looked up from her desk. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "He is waiting for you." She pointed to the double doors at the end of the hall. Trey walked toward them. He felt small. He felt dirty. He felt like the imposter he had been for so long. He pushed the doors open. The office was massive. It had a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was mahogany and dark leather. In the center of the room, behind a desk the size of a small car, sat a high-backed chair. The chair was turned toward the window, facing away from the door. Trey stood in the middle of the plush carpet. He held his cheap windbreaker closed with one hand. "Sir," he said, his voice raspy, "I am here for the hearing." The chair did not move. A voice came from behind it, a voice Trey knew better than his own heartbeat. "I have the incident report here," the voice said. "It says you engaged in physical combat with a supervisor. It says you destroyed company property. It says you disrupted operations for 3 hours." Trey swallowed. It hurt his throat. "Yes, sir," the voice continued. "It also says that 10 minutes before the fight you were offered a bribe, $5,000 cash to look the other way. Yes, sir. Why didn't you take it?" Trey looked at the back of the chair. He looked at his own hands, battered and scarred. "I needed the money," Trey said, honest and raw. "I needed it more than I have ever needed anything. I was hungry. I was cold. $5,000 would have fixed my car. It would have bought me a suit. It would have let me pretend I was human again. So why didn't you take it?" The voice pressed hard and demanding. "Because it smelled like fear," Trey said. "Trey." The chair slowly swiveled around. I sat there looking at him. I was wearing my charcoal suit, the one I wore to board meetings. I looked at my son. I did not look at him with the soft eyes of a father who forgives everything. I looked at him with the sharp, assessing eyes of a CEO who is deciding whether an asset is worth saving. I saw the bruises. I saw the fear. But I also saw the spine. He was standing straight. He wasn't slouching. He wasn't making excuses. It smelled like fear, Trey repeated, meeting my gaze. And I remembered what you told me. You can wash your hands, but you can't wash your money. I didn't want to be a fraud anymore, Dad. I didn't want to be the kind of man who sells his honor for $5,000. And more than that, I didn't want to shame you. Not again. I leaned forward on my desk. I clasped my hands, those rough hands that had caused so much trouble. "You realize I have to fire you," I said. "Fighting is a zero-tolerance offense." Trey nodded. "I know. I accept that." He turned to leave. He didn't beg. He didn't ask for a loan. He just turned to walk back out into the cold. "Wait," I said. He stopped. "I fired you from the warehouse," I said, standing up, "but I have an opening in management." Trey turned back around slowly. His eyes were wide. Management. I reached under my desk. I didn't pull out a set of keys to a new Porsche. I didn't pull out a black card. I pulled out a hard hat. It was white pristine and had the word manager stenciled on the front. I tossed it across the desk. Trey caught it. He looked at it like it was the crown jewels. "The position is in Anchorage, Alaska," I said, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. "It is a logistics hub. It is the hardest facility we operate. The weather is brutal. The hours are long. The men are tough. They chew up college boys for breakfast." "Alaska," Trey whispered. "Yes. You will be the site manager. The salary is $45,000 a year. That is it. No trust fund. No allowance. You rent your own apartment. You buy your own winter gear. You pay your own bills." I looked him deep in the eyes. "If you survive 3 years, if you turn that facility around, if you show me you can lead men without having to fight them in the parking lot, then you come back here. Then we talk about the corner office. Then we talk about the legacy." Trey ran his thumb over the brim of the hard hat. He looked at the salary. It was less than he used to spend on clothes in a year, but it was his. It was real. He looked up at me. For the first time in a year, he smiled. It was a crooked, painful smile through his wired jaw, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "I will take it," he said. "When do I leave?" "There's a plane ticket in the brim," I said. "It leaves in 4 hours. One way." "Coach." Trey pulled out the ticket. He didn't complain about the legroom. He didn't ask for an upgrade. "Thank you, Dad," he said. He put the hard hat under his arm. He walked to the door. He paused and looked back. "I won't let you down." "I know," I said. He walked out. I watched the door close. I stood there in the silence of my office. I felt a single tear roll down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly. There was no time for sentimentality. There was business to attend to. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. Minutes later, I saw a small figure emerge from the building. Trey was wearing his windbreaker, carrying his hard hat, walking toward the bus stop. He walked with a limp, but he walked with purpose. He was heading north to the cold and the dark to build a life that actually meant something. I watched him until the bus came and took him away. Then I picked up my phone. I dialed Silas. "It is done," I said. "He is gone." "Good," Silas said. "And the Huntingtons." I looked out at the city skyline. I thought of Arthur Huntington recovering in a hospital bed, wondering how he was going to pay his bills. I thought of Paige realizing that her beauty could not pay the rent. I thought of the way they had looked at me, the way they had looked at my son. "Finish it," I said, my voice cold as the Alaskan winter. "Serve the final foreclosure notice on the Huntington estate. Seize the remaining assets of his construction firm. And Silas, ensure that the eviction notice for Paige's parents is served publicly. I want the neighbors to see." "Understood, Cyrus. Anything else?" "Yes. Send a donation to the local trade school in Trey's name. An anonymous one, enough to cover tuition for 10 kids who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty." I hung up the phone. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the city move below me. I was Cyrus Blackwood. I was a gardener. And I had finally cleared the weeds. My son was gone, but for the first time in his life, he was on the right path. I turned back to my desk. There was work to do. There is always work to do. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, let me know in the comments. Tell me if you think Trey will survive Alaska, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories where the underdog bites back. Until next time. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true legacy is not defined by bank accounts but by character. Trey's painful descent from a penthouse to a frozen loading dock proves that rock bottom is often the firmest foundation for rebuilding a life. We learn that real love isn't about shielding our children from reality, but equipping them to survive it with integrity. Never trade your dignity for a false image, and never be ashamed of the rough hands that paved your way. In the end, the only respect that truly matters is the kind you earn yourself. If you believe that integrity is worth more than gold, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.